Welcome, folks, to the 109th episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show. I'm your host, Mark Hasara, and for over 60 years, my passion has been everything aviation. I love airplanes. On the Lessons from the Cockpit Show, we interview some of the most fascinating, intriguing pilots, aircrew members, aviation enthusiasts from all over the world. We want to hear their stories, but more importantly, what did they learn from being in these extreme and extraordinary military, commercial, and even general aviation environments? The purpose of our show is to demonstrate how does the aviation world work and to increase critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. A lot of the stories that you're going to hear have never been told before. And today is one of those days. You're going to hear an incredible faith-based story of one of our enemies becoming one of our patriots. This episode of the Lesson from the Cockpit Show is brought to you by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. These are beautifully drawn illustrations, profiles of airplanes, like you see the one behind me, 8874, my tanker when I was at Kadena. Printed on vinyl in 4, 6, and 8 foot lengths that you can peel off and stick on any flat surface. There's 158 ready to print right now profiles of airplanes from World War II P-51s and Me-109s all the way up to fifth gen fighters like the F-35, the F-22. Don't have sixth gen fighters yet. Haven't seen real good pictures of those. But hey, if you want a custom one built for you and drawn up to your specifications, your name on it, your tail number, the unit that you used to fly with, or a special unit that you're in love with, even the weapons load, we can do it for you. Go to wallpilot.com and fill out the custom form and send it to us and let us draw it for you. We've done a 30 footer for one guy. So our printer is really good at this. Matter of fact, so good you can read the stenciling on the missiles of the with the arming handles. On today's show, I interviewed this gentleman a while ago, and my apologies to him that this did not get put in the proper place. But this is an incredible story, particularly for Memorial Day and the Memorial Weekend. He flew C-141s, got out of the Air Force, became a reservist, flying in T-37s and T-6s. But the story he's going to tell you today, folks, is one of overcoming incredible odds of a Hungarian MiG-21 pilot who's now flying A-10s in the United States Air Force. One of our former communist enemies is now a Hawg driver. So, folks, grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the Lessons from the Cockpit Show with Cliff Wilson, now flying for Southwest Airlines, but former 141 driver. And let's hear the story of Joseph Jonas. Cliff Wilson, welcome to the Lessons
Yes,
from the Cockpit Show, brother. Live
thank you.
from
I'm honored.
Colorado Springs.
You're right. Here today, gone tomorrow. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, typical kind of
that's
airline living,
right.
huh? Yeah.
Yeah, I live in the dream. I one hotel at a time here. So
See the nation one hotel at a time.
yeah, that's right.
Or as one friend of mine says, one Starbucks at a time.
Right, right. Yeah, that's how I rate my airports. Is
Yeah.
availability of Starbucks. So that's for
Yeah.
sure.
So
So,
I ask all my guests the same first question. How did you get interested in becoming a pilot? And what's your aviation origin story?
well, thinking about that, I honestly don't remember ever not wanting to be a pilot. It's kind of how it's always was there. But the bottom line is my father was an A model C-130 pilot, photo mapping mission out of Turner Air Force Base, Albany, Georgia, which is where I was born. and he separated from the military. Actually, was in the process of separating from it and sawed his left index finger off accidentally while
Ouch.
he was. I know while he was planning on getting ready to move to Texas, and so that kind of delayed his exit from the Air Force. But so he actually I think interviewed with Eastern Airlines and did not decline to go with those guys and went back to chemical engineering at Dow Chemical, where he had co-opted as a student at Georgia Tech. And so I grew up in Lake Jackson, Texas, right there on the chemical coast, south of Houston.
Yeah.
And but all my life, he would show slideshows of his flying exploits around Africa and South America, and I would hear stories. And when he and my mother met when he was in Albany, and so it was I had the bug, from a very early age. I can remember vividly my favorite shows were Tora 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 and Black Sheep Squadron and anything having to do with that. And I would go war game World War III out in the jungles, next to my house with all the other kids in the neighborhood. And my dad had he did actually join the reserve as an intel officer some years after that. Finished out his career as a lieutenant colonel, squadron commander in an intel unit at Bergstrom Air Force Base. And he was a runner, triathlete. He's still alive and he's still kicking, still swimming. At 90 years old. But he would coordinate his 2 weeks active duty to go to the Pentagon every year so he could run the Marine Corps marathon. And so he would bring back, like the whatever, quadrennial review or whatever they put out there. And I would sit that thing down and I'd go over all the Russian, divisions and air, wings and just in my mind's eye, get ready to fight the Red Horde. So that was, so I had this path all growing up. And to me, in my simple mind as a child, airplanes meant Air Force. I didn't, I'd never once aspired to be an airline pilot. I don't remember any airline pilots. We didn't fly anywhere. And so that was not any part of my thinking. In Texas, you got to make tough decisions early on, whether it be an Aggie or a Longhorn. I looked in the mirror and I saw an Aggie, from day one. So, and that also grabbed me by the heart about the time I was a sixth grader, I think. And I didn't have any Aggies in my family, but I'd see those guys wearing the uniforms and the boots and the sabers, and it would look too cool for school for me. So about that time, a guy that I knew in my church, grew up in a Baptist church there, First Baptist Church of Lake Jackson, was going to A&M, was in the Corps, was doing great things. And so I was kind of following in the path he was blazing and ended up about my eighth grade year going to a church camp that he was a counselor at. And I was picking his brain about everything about being in the Corps. And I told him that I wanted to go into the Air Force, and I wanted to go in the Corps, and I wanted to be in the Air Force. And he got this funny look on his face. He said, "It's aircraft. Why would anybody want to be an aircraft? Those guys just march around in squares all day, and they don't do anything fun. In the Marine Corps, you can crawl around in the mud and go on field training exercises and shoot guns." And for me, it was like the skies parted and the sun started shining, the angels started singing, and I decided I wanted to be a Marine. So, from that point on, all the way through high school into my fifth year at A&M, I was, two tough teams, Aggies, Marines. I wanted to be a Marine aviator because Kelly Castleberry, that was his name. That was what he said was the best. And so I was wanting to be like him and went off to A&M, joined the Corps, joined the toughest, Navy Marine outfit I knew to join, Double D, and I tried for a Marine scholarship out of high school, didn't get it. Tried again my freshman year and again got denied. And so in an effort to, and Top Gun's coming out, naval aviation is, all the buzz. And so spring break of my fifth year, I went off to a Marine Corps orientation visit to Parris Island. Now, in my mind, Parris Island and Padre Island sounded a lot alike. I was but I quickly learned that's where the similarities stop. So while most of my buddies went on spring break to
Yeah.
Padre Island, I went to Paris Island, and with a couple other hard charging Marine wannabes, and there was guys from all over the country that were there, and we were getting gassed and beat with pugil sticks and jumping off helo repellent, and all these guys seemed to be loving every minute of it, and I was not. I thought it was I wasn't enjoying it. I'll just put it that way. And but about the time I'm starting to have doubts about the Marine Corps and me, I had my friend Kelly was flying F4 Phantoms at Fightertown East there at Beaufort Marine Corps Air Station. So his wife and 2-year-old son came and picked me up and took me to the O Club, and he met us in a flight suit, and he's doing some of this, and his squadron was about to upgrade to the brand new F-18, and I was like, that's what I'm talking about. And so I was remotivated to stay the course, and but I got home that spring, and this was spring of 1986, and I tried again for Marine scholarship. I again got denied the scholarship. I got a Marine option, which I should have been grateful for, but I really wasn't that motivated to do it, for the first time since my 8th grade year. Came home that summer, let my hair grow long, tried to figure out what I wanted to do. Came back that fall to start, shave my head again, and right about the time school started, I got a call from my mom that, hey, hate to bug you late at night, but we got a call from the church, and Kelly's been in an accident. He evidently was collided with another F4 off the coast of Georgia at night. Fishermen saw 3 parachutes, and they picked up the other 2 guys, and they're looking for him in his backseater. Start praying. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I walked out into the hall, ran into my CO of my outfit, Chris Jones, and I started saying, hey, I got a call from my mom, and I started crying, and I couldn't stop. It was just, weeping. And ultimately, I immediately knew I'm not going in the Marine Corps. I ended up 2 days later turning in my Marine option, and switching to Air Force RTC. And that was very impactful. Kelly was a great guy, well worth remembering, phenomenal guy. Left a wife and 2-year-old son who's now doing great things. He's a pastor out in Raleigh, Durham, now North Carolina. And so, I ended up getting a pilot slot, going into the Air Force, and that's what, with a several year deviation towards the Marine Corps with a lot of life's lessons along the way. The brevity of life being probably key amongst them is, I headed off to Williams Air Force Base and pilot training. So.
Oh, Williams. That was my
Yeah.
first assignment. I was going to go to Williams. I ended up at Vance, Enid by the
Okay.
Sea,
Yeah. What class did you go through when were you there?
I went through 8505. Yeah. See, ever since I was a 5-year-old kid, I wanted to fly 707s.
Yeah.
And so, I fell in love with 707 standing on the hood of my grandfather's car at the end of the LAX runways,
That's great.
which I'm sure you've been into many, many times,
I was there last week. Yes.
Yeah, landing at the South, landing on Sepulveda or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we'd always go to Randy's Donuts, the big donut place with the big donut on top of it, that's on Manchester. And just, that's how I fell in love with airplanes. So, I just.
Yeah, I would see, my father, he would talk about 130s, and that's all his pictures were that. And I remember seeing the F4s go raging over the coastline and stuff. The big thing, when I was a child, we would go to Camp Warnicki in New Braunfels every year. We'd go there, and they would, it was close to Randolph, and you'd see T-38s, a couple, 2 ship at 38s coming over, going somewhere, I think probably Seguin. And I would stop in my tracks and just stare at them, and someday, that was. So I really didn't have a firm idea of what I wanted to fly. I can remember my father many times saying, "Son, there's old pilots and there's bold pilots, but there's not many old bold pilots, so he definitely, put that in my head. And all I knew is I was ambitious and I was a striver and I wanted to do great things, especially in the Corps at A&M and heading that way.
Yeah. Yeah. See, I went to BYU when Jim McMahon was quarterback and Danny Ainge was
Okay.
playing basketball. So we had
Yeah,
some great sports years when I was at BYU,
absolutely.
you
Yep.
know. And anyway, so you go to pilot training and you said you're at Laughlin. So you stay in
Williams. I was at
Texas. Oh,
Willie.
Williams,
Yeah,
sorry.
Willie, yeah.
So obviously, oh, will you ever forget flying T-38s?
No, it was great. It was phenomenal.
Oh,
Um,
I know. And everybody that I've ever talked to that's flown that airplane, Cliff, has absolutely freaking loved it.
yeah, the
You
White
know?
Rocket. I remember, vividly coming through because I really had no flying experience other than I went to the Hondo program
Hmm.
in the Cessna 172 en route to UPT. So that was really the first flying I'd done. I was kind of behind the power curve in the Air Force program, and just the chasm between where I was as a pedestrian walking through the door and seeing 38s in the break overhead, it seemed like an insurmountable gulf, but I somehow managed to surmount it. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's great.
So, and you went to 141s right out of pilot training?
I did. Yeah, I hit that time, when Desert, I was class 9108 and Desert Shield was going on, all through the fall when I was in tweets. And by the time I was flying 38s, it's Desert Storm in January there. And I would go out in the Mo every day and pretend to be bombing Iraqis or something, in a T-38. And, it's very heady stuff. We'd go watch the war on CNN at home. And then one day, when it was all over, they gathered us all up in the base movie theater. Said, flying had been canceled for the morning brief, and everybody show up there, and that's when I got a very big dose of reality that it wasn't about me. That based on the BRAC, Base Realignment Closure Commission, that had all gotten put on hold for Desert Shield and Storm. That's all kicking back into high gear, and we don't need half of you people anymore, and so half of you sitting here will not get flying assignments. And that was my class was,
Gee.
yeah, it was, you could hear a pin drop in the auditorium as the shock and awe of that reality began to sink in. And so my class at the time was the senior class on base. Our drop was on the base. We didn't know what it was, but we knew that they were about to pair us up with it. And so for a week or two, we didn't know if we were going to be lumped in with the banked system, with the new system, or if we are going to keep our plane. So we all kept our flying assignments, and everybody else got 40 to 60% of every class for the next several years did not get flying assignments.
Yeah.
So it was brutal.
Oh, yeah. I know a
Yeah.
lot of guys that ended up as bank guys.
Yeah. Yep.
A number of them ended up going to UAVs, you know?
Yeah. No, you tend to be a little idealistic and then majorly skeptical too. And I remember guys getting banked fighters or banked, and they just, no one believed it would actually happen. And it did, but they didn't believe it at the time. No one believed anything, after but it was, they encouraged everybody to leave, go find guard and reserve units, stick around if you want and try to get an assignment. Fortunately for me, I got, my whole class got an assignment. And I kind of wanted to follow in my dad's footsteps. I wanted any kind of 130. I really wanted a special ops 130. A slick 130 would have been great. And much to my surprise and slight chagrin, I got a 141 to Travis, which really was not anything I'd really aspired to do. And I remember at the time just thinking, well, at least they do airdrop, and of course, Travis was the one place that didn't do airdrop. They were straight air land, and so it took a little bit of recaging my heart and mind as to what I was what I was going to be doing in the future. As it turned out, as is usually the case, God knew better than I did what I needed to be doing, and
Oh, ain't that the truth, man?
yeah, and it
God's
was
vector check, man.
So it was exactly where I needed to be and loved it. But the net effect for me was I did get an assignment, my whole class did, but all of our training dates got pushed way back. So I sat around Willie doing almost absolutely nothing for about 7 months, waiting to go to follow on training, waiting to go to survival training and then to Altus. And whatever limited aviation skills I had managed to acquire in T-37s and T-38s significantly atrophied by the time I had showed up to training at Altus. And with their quick program, a few simulators, few rides, me hanging onto the tail of the 141, I ended up busting my first check ride that mattered. So the first Form 8 check that's there to stay on my FEF, I ended up going from those that will category to those that have category right off the bat. So that was another big dose of humility and taking me down a notch or two right off the bat, in the 141. So
I Q2'd my first one too.
yeah. Well, this was Q3. It was all the way, and it was and you can make excuses all day long, but it was one of those things that when you're at that stage of your career, you're thinking all is lost. I'm going to show up with a scarlet U on my flight suit, and everybody's going to think I'm not good.
Yeah.
It really didn't matter. I worked real hard. I passed the next check ride. I got out there and like fly as much as you can, get used to, and got out to Travis in November of 1991. Married my wife in January 92, which we had met. She was at Arizona State. So I'm one of those ASU Willie marriages, which there were many of back in the day. And we, started our life out there in California. At Travis and loved it. It was great. Strat airlift flying all over the world,
And see, that's one of the great things about the 141, is you got to see some very cool places around the world, I through the
Yeah.
Pacific, and what did they call it?
The tube of pain.
The SID. No,
Oh,
it
yeah,
was
yeah.
you go to Dakota.
Dakota and Kadena. Yeah, this
Yeah, and fly the
theater
SID.
deployment. Yep.
Yeah. And I had no idea what that even was
Yeah.
until I became a duty officer in the TACC
Yeah. Yeah.
and started running those missions, and
Yep.
I thought to myself, those dogs, those C-141 dogs,
Oh,
they're
yeah.
going to Hong Kong, they're going to Singapore,
Diego.
Malaysia,
Yeah.
Diego Garcia, Masira and Oman, and then
Yeah.
turn around coming home and, all these things. And I thought, maybe tankers isn't the place I'm supposed to be.
Yeah, it was all of that. It was, I loved it. It was, and one thing about being a West Coast guy too, we went east a lot too because everything was going on in the east.
Yeah.
We'd go west
Yeah.
and do the SIDS and hang out in Yokota for a month and rack up per diem and go climb Mount Fuji and then we'd get to go to Europe or Saddam kept rolling tanks south and
Yeah.
getting things all spun up over there in the Middle East again. And so we would, we'd go try to get back and forth across the pond 2 or 3 times before and rack up as many hours as possible before that petered out, and
Mhm.
so, and then obviously the Mogadishu stuff was going on.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I forgot. There's a lot of airplanes going in and out of Mogadishu during this time. I have a friend
Yeah.
of mine, good friend of mine, that I interviewed last week. Matter of fact, he's one of my pilot training class buddies who
Great.
flew C5s,
Yeah.
And he said, if you really want to see hell on earth, go to Mogadishu. You know,
Yeah.
he
No,
said it's terrible.
I believe it. I went there twice and it was all just quick, drop stuff off and leave, but it was enough to look around and go, yeah, this place is bad. And we would go in the stage in Cairo West, and it was like a black hole that if you got anywhere near Cairo, you'd get sucked into that stage and you can end up anywhere, but going downrange and into Mogadishu was something we did. So
Yeah. So what's your longest flight in a 141?
you know, um Piloting probably did a just an AR back from Europe to maybe England Air Force Base or something. I rode, I deadheaded on some double ARs from California all the way to Dhahran. You know,
Oh, geez.
yeah, it was, like I said, we call it the tube of pain, and that's a hard earned, moniker for the 141 there. It was not the most comfortable ride, but yeah, they would load up, as many crews as you could put on the back of that thing and go all the way to Dhahran. So really halfway around the world.
Man, that's a long ride from
Yeah.
Travis
No, it
direct to
is.
Dahran.
Yep. So
That's what,
very,
like 3 ARs?
yeah, at least two, probably three. Yeah. So
My
it
gosh.
was a
That's a
long,
long
long
time.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had some
Yeah.
other days, out in the Pacific where, you're like 8 hour leg, 5 hour leg, some of those kind of things, augmented crews, but not, AR and that much.
Yeah.
So,
I tell a lot of people about this particular mission that the
mhm.
strategic airlifter guys do, but that's moving the president and the Phoenix
Huh.
Banner missions. Why don't you
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about that for a minute?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know, it was pretty rare to get a good banner mission where you actually saw the president or followed him around. But I did get one during that time frame. We did a lot of alerts, here and there. But I followed President Clinton around the Pacific for the APEC summit in '94, right after the midterm elections with
Mhm.
the contract with America stuff, and it was great. We were, I think, 3 or 4 days in Hawaii, 4 days in Manila, 3 or 4 days in Jakarta, and everything's going great until we all got Montezuma's revenge
Oh,
in Jakarta. But the mission still went on. So it was, that was one of the more memorable trips that by the time we had flown from Jakarta to, I think, maybe Guam to Barber's Point, I know I had to put one crew member in the hospital for dehydration from
ooh,
vomiting and diarrhea. And then
yeah,
the rest of us were really sick.
yeah,
So yeah, it's not as glorious as it looked on all the photos we showed our wives. So,
yeah. Could the C-141 carry the limo?
um, I think it could. I never saw it on there, but we did carry like this big Winnebago looking thing,
Oh, yeah,
So I never saw the limo on any plane I flew, but
yeah.
I think it could.
Well, and there's one other mission that I remember too when I was at the TACC, and that was uh, you had to put, it was called the silver bullet that you put in when you took the Korean commander wherever he needed to go,
Yeah.
and they had a name for that
I
mission
did
too,
do
but I can remember.
one mission from Korea to Hawaii that was bringing back human remains from the Korean War, and that was a very moving and interesting thing to do and to be a part of the whole ceremony back at Hickam.
Oh
So,
yeah, describe that because that's really amazing when you see this.
yeah,
It's very somber, but it's very yeah, still puts a lump in my throat. Patriotic.
yeah, no, it was great. I mean, it was when they were still had teams, finding bodies and identifying them from the Korean War, and I remember we flew, I think, from Seoul to to Hickam and had a big, when we landed, it was all pre-planned, big, open the pedal doors and very very moving experience to be a part of that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, flag draped coffin going out the
Yep,
back,
yep,
and all the pomp and ceremony that goes along with that.
that's right.
And every once in a while, the families are there to meet you, when they repatriate, because, and
Yep.
I know the repatriation agency was there at Hickam, that would do a
Mhm.
lot of the forensics on the remains
Right.
and so forth.
Yeah.
I have an uncle who was he's a Vietnam vet. He got shot down on his first mission cliff in
Wow.
1965 and was taken prisoner
Oh my
in a
gosh.
F4. And a lot of his buddies didn't come back.
Yeah.
Uh, and he was a long time prisoner. He's there for over 7 years.
Wow.
And so it's interesting because those guys um have an extremely patriotic view of America.
Yeah.
You know,
You know,
we
they
got
do.
to
a dear friend at Southwest that was spent a year in the Hanoi Hilton, and Mike Penn, and loved flying with him and hearing his stories. And you're absolutely right. It's a great group of men that did that.
My wife and I got to attend the 25th Vietnam POW reunion. It was held at Dallas at Ross Perot's
Yeah,
ranch,
yeah, yeah. I bet
and
Mike was there.
I got to meet all these guys, Leo
Yeah,
Thorsness, all these names that you have
right.
to learn when you're going through ROTC, and
Yeah,
there they are standing in front of you, you
yeah.
know,
That's
uh,
an
you
honor.
know, Bud Day with his Medal of Honor around his neck, Robbie Reisner, you
Yeah,
know,
Bud
and
Days.
some of the most humble, most incredible people you have ever met.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
That's
Harold Johnson, who was Leo Thorsness, electronic warfare officer. I got to spend some time with him, and I wanted to hear about killing SAM sites and all that. And
yeah.
he goes, "You're a Desert Storm vet?" I go, "Yeah, I sure am. I flew tankers and everything like that." And I said, "I want to ask you some questions." He goes, "Yeah, we can talk about that later." I want to talk about laser guided bombs, all these kinds of things, all
That's
this new
cool.
technology and everything like that. And again, just incredible. And
Yeah.
he had his hat,
Mhm.
um, his like campaign boonie hat that that's
Uh-huh.
like folded up on one side, and
Yeah.
he had all the mission markings on the front of it.
Wow.
Okay, and he had like SA2 silhouettes for when they killed a SAM site. Okay,
Yeah.
and a couple of them were red. And I asked Harold, I said, "Hey, what's the red ones mean?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Mark, those are the ones I had to come home and pretty much change my underwear."
Wow.
And I went, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
And I said, I see two red SAMs, and I see, two MiG-17 silhouettes. He goes, "Yeah, that was the mission that we flew.
Wow.
That, he got the Medal of Honor. I got the Air Force Cross." And anyway, just amazing. So
No, it's a real honor to get to meet people like that, and to talk to them and pick their brains. And I flew with Bud Day's son George Day, who was Southwest pilot until recently. A great guy, and to hear his perspective as the son of Bud Day, during all that was great too.
you want to hear a funny story
Yeah,
about him? I think it's the same guy.
yeah,
He flew F-16s.
he did. Yeah,
So uh, this is a funny story. It's like the summer of 2000,
uh-huh.
and the 23rd Fighter Squadron from Spangdahlem is down there. All right.
Mhm.
And I see this badge, this name tag that says Day on it, George Day,
Yeah,
but I didn't think anything of it, you know?
uh-huh.
And it was a weekend and we weren't flying, and we were having one of those big quad parties that we had where all
Yeah,
the squadrons get together,
right.
and, we're cooking dogs and steaks and everything like that. And there's freaking Bud Day, okay, with his Medal of Honor
Yeah,
polo on, okay, and he's serving daiquiris. All right.
that
And
sounds
I,
like him.
I
Yeah,
go, I go, Colonel Day, um, I'm Mark Hasara. My uncle is Bob Jeffrey. Okay. And he puts both pictures down. He reaches across the table and wants to shake my hand. Okay. He goes,
wow.
"Man, your uncle was great people. I love your uncle. I love your uncle." I said, "Sir, what are you doing here?" He goes, "Oh, my son's a Viper driver at Spangdahlem. He's a weasel guy." Okay. And I said, "George?" He goes, "Yeah, that's my son." And I went, "Wow." I mean,
Yeah,
and I don't drink or anything like that, because he asked me, he goes, "Hey, which one do you want?" I go,
yeah,
"Peach and strawberry." And I said, "Well, I'm very religious, member of the LDS church, and I don't drink, I got to drive all these guys home, you know." And he laughed, you know, but
yeah. George is great. He's the one guy I ever lobbied to get hired at Southwest that I had never even met. But I had so many people telling me, "You got to
oh
hire this
yeah,
guy. He's just a
yeah.
great guy." So I went into everybody I knew and said, "We got to get." People are calling me, telling me we want this guy. So no, he's just a phenomenal man.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and like I said, his pedigree goes back. But I just remember,
Yeah.
I see Colonel Day behind the thing, he's
Yep.
blending daiquiris and everything, and
Yep.
like, what are you doing here in Incirlik, Turkey? And he
That's
told me, oh,
fun.
I'm here visiting my son. My son's a Viper driver, and I had a couple days off, so I thought I'd come out and
Fantastic.
and meet him.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you go from 141s and go back to UPT, and you're teaching.
Yeah. So let me tell you one more thing in the 141
Okay.
there. So the when I busted that first check ride, I kind of alluded to that I was very ambitious. I had, had all these great dreams of things I wanted to do in the Air Force. And, part of that's just being young and idealistic, but stumbling out of the blocks on that one didn't help. Um, and and so I get to Travis. I worked hard. I upgraded, right on schedule or ahead of time. First pilot and aircraft commander and flying around the world. Went to receiver air refueling school at Altus, and I busted that check ride too.
Oh,
So if the first one was painful, the second one was excruciating.
yeah.
Okay. So I go from, and, anybody who flies has been in the military, it's a real hit to your pride to, to do that. And I remember, one of my buddies that was there at the time trying to console me, going, look, it's going to be okay. This other guy we know, he's got two busted check rides and he's still flying. And it didn't help. It was, wasn't, didn't really want to be compared to that guy in the first place. And it just, was, a real setback and so you can kind of look at this in a grand narrative is all my perceptions of what my flying career was going to be were being ripped out of my tightly gripped hand. And really I'd already adjusted. I could see the guys that I saw getting promoted around me in all over the Air Force post Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Most of those guys that were climbing the chain, skyrocketing, were not guys I really wanted to be like. The guys that I did want to be like were the guys who were getting tossed out with the trash. Hey, don't let the door hit you in the butt on the way out. And so early on in my career, and you got choices to make whether I'm going to go this path or do this or go to this school or whatever. I could already see kind of the handwriting on the wall, so to speak, that I don't think I'm going to be long term successful in this organization. But I also, I had a wife and we had a daughter, then we had another daughter at Travis, and I had, had an intense desire to continue to fly and provide for my family, and a new reservist then, and they're telling me about airline stuff. That was my first exposure to the airlines. Going, wait, that they pay you how much to fly to Newark, and this kind of stuff, and so I wanted just to be minimally viable moving forward. I wanted to be an instructor in the 141. And I remember thinking, I don't even know if they'll make me, I've got two busted check rides in the 141. I mean, but, I always flew well. I wasn't a nervous flyer or whatever. And so I went to IP school at Altus, had to swallow hard and go back to Altus one more time and passed that and flew around as an instructor in the 141 for maybe 6 or 8 months before taking an assignment. And so, with that in mind, I wasn't looking for what the next best career move was. I just wanted to do my time in the Air Force, get out and go to the airlines. And at this point, they're saying, oh my gosh, we've mismanaged the pilot force. You guys are national treasures. Air Force can't produce enough pilots for Delta alone to meet all the hiring needs, from the bathtub with you saw the graphics. So I had this feeling that, hey, you know what? I've got one more assignment due on my commitment. I've got to do something else for 3 or 4 years. I'm going to go off to the airlines, and even I will probably be able to get a job, with all the jobs they're talking about. And so I called a buddy out at Laughlin that I knew from A&M and asked him what life was like out there. It's like, oh, it's great. Fly once a day, take the rest of the day off. Go play golf, see your kids, whatever you want to do. We take 3-day weekends, at least once a month, probably usually twice a month. Get all the holidays off. And I mean, it sounded like aviation heaven, to from going from AMC, another missed Christmas, to only flying during the week and taking all the 3-day weekends, and all instructor time. And I've done fine in the Tweed and the 38. I like that kind of flying, and I didn't get air sick, and so instead of going like to a T1 or something, the idea of getting back and flying acrobatics and low levels and those kind of things was very appealing to me. And I kind of had in this back of my mind, well, I remember back when I was a student, most of the major weapons system guys were either had not upgraded to aircraft commander, or had just upgraded aircraft commander, had come back to non-volled back to ATC. Hey, I'm an instructor in a major weapons system. I'll kind of be a big fish in a little pond, going back to Laughlin. No one wants to go there. And so that was kind of the logic that led me to go to Del Rio to be a T-37 instructor, and I got my commitments all lined up today, planning on getting out of the Air Force, in 99, when all the hiring is going to start going and everything's lined up perfectly. And I go to Pitt in January of 96. And I've got some of my buddies there from pilot training that are still holding out for that fighter, their third FAPE assignment, waiting to get, a fighter. And they set me up with the biggest Santa Claus in the squadron for my qual check. And I busted it.
Oh, no. At Pitt?
At Pitt. And it started raining. As I was coming back from the MOA thinking, did I just bust that check ride? It started raining. It was one of these rain events in Texas that's just training thunderstorms, for a week.
Oh, yeah. 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 We get the same in Oklahoma Advance.
Well, I got to sit in the leper colony and chew on that one for about a week. And you think COVID is contagious. No one even wanted to look at me, with 3 Q3s on my FEF. And it was, first one was really painful. Second one was excruciating. The third one was a total identity crisis for me. I remember I would run. I was a runner at the time. I still run some. And I remember just running in the rain and just raging at God. What are you doing to me? I'm getting mashed like a grape here. I'm not asking to be Thunderbird lead. I just want to be a Tweed IP at Laughlin, and they wouldn't even take you into ATC with more than 2. Now, to this day, I don't know who anybody ever had to go, does he have a pulse? We'll take him, because they're ramping up pilot production at Laughlin, and everywhere else too, against this backdrop. But I went running in the rain one day until I couldn't run anymore. And I finally stopped, and I'm walking, and I'm just told a baby and a dog, and they're all counting on me for food, and it was like a really clear communication to me. He said, no, you're not. You're not a pilot. You're my servant. You're going to Del Rio to serve me, not to be Mr. Air Force. So my sheepish rebuttal was, hey, I didn't go to SOS. I'm an anthrax denier. I wasn't planning on being chief of staff of the Air Force. But what it did is it completely, I came to the conclusion, I rightly concluded at the time, I could get on that treadmill and try to outrun the guy next to me. That's, to be in everything and more in the Air Force. And it would not matter. There would come a day where somebody look at my FEF and count 3. You're not management material. But here I am still flying airplanes. I passed all my check ride, after the sun, clouds, and I moved on. So why am I here? And it was liberating. It was the most liberating thing. Ultimately, I made a decision to embrace the truth that, hey, look, all things are working together for my good because I love the Lord and I'm called according to his purpose. So he's got plans. I'm just on a different program than anyone else I know, and I wouldn't recommend it to anybody either. But so when I got out to Laughlin, I was hypersensitive to why am I here? I'm not going to be the flight commander. I'm not going to be the SOF. I'm not doing all these other things. I'm going to trip turn every day like everybody else. and do my job as best I know how to do it. But there's other things I'm here for, and that's kind of the setup for meeting Joseph Jonas and other things.
Yeah, we'll get into Joseph here in just a few minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you
Yeah.
interviewed at Southwest, obviously they looked at your FEF and said, what's going on here?
You
You
know,
know, you would think that they would look at this and they go, all right, we got a few questions for you.
hey, Sluggo, here's the truth. I applied everywhere but Southwest Airlines. And when it came time to get a job, because the airlines were 6 1 or half dozen the other to me. They were all equal to me. I'd never wanted to be an airline pilot really up until this point. They were all hiring. United American, Delta, Northwest US Airways, all those guys. All of my peers were getting hired. And honestly, I didn't have the money laying around for a type rating, and they're paying half of what everybody else was paying. And I didn't want to live in Arizona, which was one of their domiciles. So I was like, hey, no brainer. I want to apply there. And I sat for a year and a half and watched all of my peers get hired. Every one of those applications asked, have you ever busted a check ride? If so, explain. Yep. And I'm very honest, 3 times, all informal training programs. And imagine that. I was the one guy who did not get hired by United American, Delta, Northwest Airways, all those guys. But people, God began opening doors towards Southwest for me. I had people going, hey, have you ever considered, you're the kind of guy they're looking for, and I really hadn't considered. Started looking into them and go, hey, you know what? That's the kind of place I'd want to be anyway. And at the time, you had to have a type rating. They dropped the type rating requirement to apply. And if they gave you an interview, you still had to get the type rating to get hired. So I applied without one. Now I'd got off active duty, gotten hired as a reservist in the Tweet, and I was teaching the simulator at Laughlin for Lear Sigler, and flying as a part timer, doing those 2 jobs. So I had money to get a type rating. I got the type rating, told them I had one. I got an interview 2 days later, and they still had, more requirements than everybody else's. I forget what it was, but it was like 1,000 PIC, turbine time,
Yeah.
several thousand. And I had all that. And if you got a type rating, you had all their requirements, their entire interview process was based solely on personality. Tell me a time when, what you did this. Hey, I can talk all day long. And don't ask, don't tell. No one ever asked me once about a check ride bust, and I didn't tell them. And here I am.
How long have you been flying with Southwest now?
It'll be 25 years in March.
Wow.
Yeah. So I started
Wow.
in March of 2000. So pre 9/11, and so I was still living in Del Rio for the first 5.5 years I worked at Southwest. So living in Del Rio, which again was non-standard. My whole life is going to go in really non-standard at this point. I don't know one other reservist that willingly, part timer anyway, that lived in Del Rio once they got that airline job. But we loved it there. We had a lot of really good things going on ministry wise, a lot of friends, just cool things that were going. And my kids were stable in school, and so we decided to stay there. And I would commute to Houston for work, and stuck it out there for another 5.5 years. And ultimately, I ended up I had 16 good years in Del Rio, or 16 good years in the Air Force flying, and did 4 years Academy liaison to finish out 20 years as a reserve major retirement.
Excellent. So if you've been with Southwest for 25 years, you've flown just about every version of the 737, haven't you?
Yeah, 200s, 300s, 500s, 700s, 800s, 800 max.
So which is your favorite?
I think honestly, it's a toss up between the 700 and the 800 max. I like the max. I'm looking forward to one of these days eventually getting the 700 max, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
I like the size of the 700 better.
Yeah.
So
Does Southwest have, I mean, they've got beautiful cockpits. Do you guys have the heads up guidance system in yours on the left side?
we do, just on the left side. And we did on everything except the 200.
Okay. So explain what that is, because the heads up guidance system, I'm using terms that, a lot of my subscribers may not understand, but it's basically a HUD for an airline pilot.
It
Okay.
is. Yeah, and it's I'd never flown I'd never flown a plane in the Air Force that had a HUD. So the only HUD work I'd ever done is here at Southwest, and basically it comes down, it's a combiner that you can drop. It's pretty heavy, thick metal. The newer versions are not as heavy, but the older ones are. And you look through that to fly, right down to men's, right, at the lowest, cat three men's, and it's like magic. It works like a charm.
Yeah.
Just keep the donut in there, and it makes you
Dot in
look
the
like
hole,
the
man.
pilot you
Dot in the
always thought
hole.
you were.
Yeah. Dot in the
Yeah,
hole. So I
yeah.
used to
No,
work for Rockwell Collins, which of
okay,
course makes the
yeah,
heads up guidance systems. And
right,
we call it a reconfigurable cockpit. And what you could do is you could move stuff around on the instrument panel and on the console, but it had a heads up guidance system in it.
yeah,
And I'll never forget the first time I flew with that thing. All right. And at Rockwell, they only flew that thing to one place, Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Okay. And I'm sure you've
yeah.
been to Jackson Hole. That's
I've actually never flown into Jackson Hole. I've been there on the ground, but I've never flown there.
oh, really interesting.
Yeah,
And so Jackson's got high terrain, hot during the summer, driving snowstorms during the winter,
yeah,
and they had the EVS, you know, uh, the enhanced vision system hooked up to it. And I'll never forget, man, looking through that HUD and
yeah,
seeing the runway in a snowstorm from like 8 miles out.
yeah.
Okay. And here you have the piece of glass in front of you,
Right.
and you can see all the terrain, you can see all the buildings, you see the runway out there and everything, all the lights and everything like that, the highway, everything. Okay. And then outside that piece of glass, it looks like you're making the jump to light speed, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. No,
Okay.
it's magic. It works great. It
Oh,
really does.
and the first time I did that, Cliff, I thought to
Yeah,
myself, holy smokes, man, this is incredible. Okay.
yeah,
It was a little, um, it kind of made my head swim a little bit because
yeah,
again, the snow's going by, except for
yeah,
that big piece of glass right in front of you.
yeah,
And so you really had to concentrate on that. All right.
yep,
But I'll never forget the first time I did it. And the instructor, this gal said, "Hey, look, let me show you something. Let me
yeah,
show you why this thing is so cool."
right.
And she says, "We're going to land, but I'm going to put like almost like blizzard-like conditions out there. Okay. And these are Cat 3 minimums.
Right.
And believe me, you'll be able to land the airplane.
Yeah.
Okay. You've got plenty of hours in KC-135s, Boeing airplanes. You know what it's like.
Yeah.
All
Yep.
Boeing airplanes are built the
They're Boeing
same.
to Boeing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. They're all built the same. The stab trims, cutout switches in the same place in every
Right.
cockpit. You
Yep.
know, and again, I could see everything through that glass
Mhm.
because of that infrared enhanced vision system. But everything outside that, again, it looked like you're making the jump to light speed. But from
Yeah.
8 miles out, you could see the runway, you could see the lights, everything.
Yep.
And sure enough, man, came right in, landed, not a problem. It was the most
Yep.
amazing thing, and
Yeah.
I didn't fly with any of that kind of stuff, obviously, in the tanker,
Yeah. Yeah.
and your 141, and then obviously the
Yeah. We
tweet,
did.
man.
We did Cat 2 approaches, but we had a really archaic kind of an all system that was very, very cumbersome. We did a couple of those real ones too, but I would much rather have the HUD. So
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
Yeah. I look back at the avionics that you and I started with
Yeah.
versus the avionics that we have now. And it's like,
Yeah.
holy smokes, man.
I'm really grateful to have learned, the rule of fives and all the different things, and the tweet and I ended up flying the T-37 for 7 years, and it was a great skills builder, for
Yeah.
all of them. So
See, when I was in the KC-135, we had the ACE program
yeah,
at
yeah,
Pease, and we had T-37s,
right,
which was
great,
perfect for the Northeast. Okay.
yeah,
Because every place had 6,000 feet of runway and a tower. All right. That was basically the only thing. That was the only rules, and so we'd take off from Pease, fly over Boston, do approaches at Martha's Vineyard, and then land at Groton, Connecticut.
yeah,
And then we go from Groton, Connecticut to Albany. Okay.
Uh,
and do approaches there. I called Albany Satan's playground. Every time I went there, something weird happened.
uh,
Every time I went there.
yeah.
The worst hydroplaning experience I ever had in the military was at Albany. Okay. And
Wow.
and literally we're going down the runway about 20 degrees off heading, I mean, it was scary. And
Yeah.
then of course we'd fly from Albany back to Pease. Okay. That would be our 3 hop for the day, and the tweet was so much fun, a great acro airplane.
Yep.
I mean, we weren't doing a lot of acro. We're just doing as many approaches as we can, doing cross countries, all over the Northeast, um, flew by New York one day on our way to Oceana Naval Air Station, which was really
Yeah.
cool. It was
Oh,
just a
that
fun airplane to fly, as
was.
as you all know. Very archaic instruments, okay? You know, an RMI, I tell that to people, they go, RMI, I
Yep.
don't even know what that is, you
Yeah.
know?
Oh, cross cockpit, from the right seat. So,
Yeah, yeah. But
yeah.
it was absolutely one of the funnest airplanes I ever flew,
Yep.
ever flew. So,
Amen.
um, and so you flew tweets in the reserve for
I
7 years.
flew tweets. I got off active duty in March of '99 when all the airlines were hiring, and they weren't hiring me. And so I was blessed to get hired at Lear Sigler to teach the simulator there. I did that for about a year. And that's the year that I got, ended up getting the type rating and coming to Southwest after that. And it was a great year. It was one of the best years of my life. Me and another friend helped start a Christian teen club in Del Rio. It was just
Yeah,
a phenomenal year that I wouldn't trade for a year of experience at any of the airlines. And then, of course, at 9/11, 100% of my peers lost their jobs,
yeah,
except so again, it was a providential blessing on my life
yeah,
to get me there. And the net effect also of those busted check rides is that I had no agenda anymore at this far as the Air Force went, other than to do a good job and fly planes and have fun and contribute. And I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it. It was just I didn't have the pressure of chasing things that other guys were chasing, and the flying was phenomenal. It
yeah.
was great. And then ultimately, like I said, T6. So
Hey, I was going to ask you, where were you on 9/11? Were you out on the road on 9/11?
I was supposed to have. So we had a guy in our squadron who was a year behind me in the whole process. He was trying to get an airline job. I had an airline job. He had a wife and 2 little girls, just like me. His oldest daughter was there, and they were 1 year younger than my daughters. His daughter's name was Bailey. My oldest daughter's name Bailey. Um, but he went from a 365 payday a year to troughing in the reserve as he's trying to get this airline job. And this was summer 2001. The hiring binge was starting to wane a little bit, and he got a head cold. Instead of going to NIF, because he couldn't go to NIF really because he needed to keep working, kept aggravating it, and it ended up going from a head cold to a chest cold. And so one day he's like, I don't care what, he didn't have outside medical insurance because he's about to get an airline job and get Cadillac insurance. But he went to the hospital at Valverde Regional Hospital. They said, you've got sepsis.
Oh,
uh, or actually he had double pneumonia and then contracted sepsis from that, and his organs began shutting down and he died.
oh,
And and his
jeez.
and it was absolutely shocking to everybody. Guy, one of your peers, great guy, everybody loved him, um, and totally healthy. Only to there he is in Wilford Hall, and is not going to make it, and he didn't make it. And the guy who was trying to plan his funeral had a dilemma, and I heard his dilemma. He said his 8-year-old daughter wanted to sing for her daddy at his funeral, and she had picked out a song and was going to sing it. She goes, "Do you know any 8-year-old girl that can stand next to the open casket of her father and sing a
Hmm.
song?" Well, I've sung all my life. I said, "Look, I'll sing with her or I'll sing for her, but I'll make sure that song is sung at at her daddy's funeral. And so on the morning of the funeral, I walked my daughters to school, past Sacred Heart Catholic Church in downtown Del Rio to the Episcopal Church school where my daughters went to school, very mindful that Captain Drew Cajuns would never be able to walk his daughters to school again. I went back to my house and changed into a suit. I had a guy in my squadron who had some equipment. He was going to play some music at this funeral, and he'd written a song and he was going to set it up. I said, "Hey, I'll live a block from there. I'll meet you there early." And so I walked into the church expecting to see a lot of people, getting ready for the funeral. And no one was there except for the open casket of my friend. And I'm standing there in the foyer alone with him in an empty church, just looking at him in his flight suit, saying, "There, but by the grace of God go I." And for about 5 minutes, and there was an usher just outside the door, and somebody walked up to the usher and said, "Hey, did you watch CNN this morning? A small plane just hit the World Trade Center." And that caught my attention. So I walked over and listened to him, and another guy walks up and said, "Goes, no, no, no. That was a large plane, like a 737 or something, and they just hit Tower 2." So I'm thinking, that's an act of war. We're at war. And so now, as people are filing in for the memorial service for Captain Drew Cajuns, everybody's talking, the Pentagon's under attack. And all I could do is this, we're getting ready for this funeral, is to sit off to the side and look at this poor mama and two little girls and say, of all the days you want daddy to come home and say, it's going to be okay. Daddy's not coming home. And so when it came time to sing, I got up, I went to Bailey Cajuns and I said, "Do you want to sing or do you want?" And she pointed to me. So I stood there and sang the song that she had picked out about a week before, verbatim out of Psalm 91, God's 911 on 911. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. He will lift you up on eagle's wings, bury you on the breath of dawn. I'm singing from Psalm 91, concurrent with the first counterattack and the war on terror in the back of United Flight 93. And that's where I was.
Brother, I don't believe in coincidences anymore.
Yeah, no, absolutely not.
I was to be singing Psalm 91 on 9/11.
Yes.
At one of your buddy's funerals, as all of that's going on in the background. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So I was supposed to have leave right after that to go to a four-day trip in Houston. I called our chief pilot, Bob Lewis. He said, "You couldn't get here if you tried. Don't call us. We'll call you." So I went to the graveside service of Drew Cajuns. There were probably 500 people there in flight suits to honor Drew. The border was in total lockdown. Half the kids in schools there were Mexican nationals, didn't know if they're going to be allowed to go home or if allowed to come back. The base was in lockdown. The 4-ship flyby was canceled, grounded. And half our squadron is United or American guys. We're doing a full recall roster, trying to decide, find out if any of our guys are involved. And, one of my buddies who had been at United about a year turned to me and said, "We all just lost our jobs today." And everybody did but me.
Yeah. God, what an amazing story.
Yeah.
What an amazing story. So I want to go on to the next amazing story.
Okay.
Tell us the story about Joseph.
So
folks, this is incredible. When I read through this, big lump in my throat. This is incredible. I'm really anxious for you to tell this story because this is American exceptionalism at its finest. In my
That's
opinion.
exactly what it is. It is.
So go ahead and tell us the story of Joseph.
So you go back to when, the lean years when there weren't very many student pilots and we're not producing very many pilots, but we had a lot of instructor pilots and a lot of pilot training capacity. There were, somebody came up with this program, the Airman Leadership Program. And it was, if you had a Air Force and you could remotely be considered an ally of ours, then we would take your best and brightest pilot candidates, send them to the Defense Language Institute to work on their conversational English, and send them to pilot training in America on a 9-month T-37 syllabus, at the end of which they would get pilot wings on the chest, go back to their host countries, and become ambassadors of goodwill for America. Someday they're leaders in their Air Force. America good. We get students to fly with. They get, cross-cultural exchange there. And so when I arrived at Laughlin, after busting that third check ride after Pitt, and here I am, as a new line IP, every flight had 2 or 3 or 4 of these guys from all over the world, Africa, Asia, South America, you name it, Eastern Europe. And qualitatively, this sluggo from, by the time an American gets to pilot training, you might got 1 or 2 guys that are better than everybody else, and 1 or 2 that are kind of lagging the fight, but everybody else is right in that middle, equivalent. Well, these guys were far more extreme. I mean, the good ones were amazing. The bad ones were breathtakingly or life-takingly bad if you weren't careful, and so the and each flight had these in them, but they canned that program or stopped it when they needed the pilot production ramping back up, 96, 8, 7, 8, 9. But the pipeline for these guys was for about 2 years. And so the guys were already in that pipeline. They let them finish, and then they didn't have those guys anymore. So here I am, again, I'm not aspiring for greatness. I'm just a line IP down in Knight's flight. And you would start with a class, and that class would herd through together. You might lose 1 or 2 or gain 1 or 2 along the way. And when we introduced ourselves, we'd go around the room. Well, I was reading a book called The Hope and the Glory. And one of the main characters in there was this young Eastern European guy, right off the boat. It's about the nation state of Israel, the modern nation state of Israel, from 1948. How in your mind you picture a person, and a character in the book. And one of these guys was a young guy from Poland, right off the boat, right into combat into Israel. And his name is Yossi, I think, Blumenthal. And he shows up riding a donkey wearing a British pot, in the book. And all the IDF guys laughed. It's Don Quixote, it's and so when I first walked into the flight room and I see Joseph's class in spring of '98, there's Don Quixote sitting right there. In my mind's eye, I had already seen him. So, we go around, who are you? It was probably 15 instructors and 30 students or something like that. And we all introduced ourselves, and I walked up to Lieutenant Jonas, said, "Hey, I'm going to call you Quixote. You're now Quixote to me." And it was a very awkward. He kind of looked at me like, who are you? Okay, whatever. But in my mind, that's, it was, and it ended up being kind of emblematic, to dream the impossible dream, kind of thing. But he was actually, I didn't really know him at the time, but we all got to know him as time went on, and a little bit of his background. And one of the funny things is he actually wasn't an officer. He was a 21-year-old cadet. They were supposed to have, it was supposed to be an officer, but he had gotten selected a year, in his sophomore year at the Hungarian Military Academy. He was one of the first. So the U.S. Air Force Academy, reaching out to our former enemies, had invited 2 cadets from every former Warsaw Pact country to come to Colorado Springs for a 10-day visit, roundtable discussions. And he was one of 2 Hungarian cadets selected to go there. And it was groundbreaking, for him with his background, to see America for the first time. And so he had seen what America was like. Well, when his junior year, when this opportunity for a Hungarian to come to pilot training in America came down, Hungarians weren't going to send anybody. Hey, we're Soviet doctrine, Soviet equipment, and the typical Hungarian pilot's only getting 40 hours in a year at this point. Well, this is 160 hours jet instruction by the Americans So Cadet Jonas ran it up the chain. Go, hey, why are we not sending somebody? They go, hey, good point. They allowed him to compete against two lieutenants, and they said, okay, Omni VOR for the purposes of pilot training, you're a lieutenant because he beat them on the criteria they put to it, and he came to pilot training in America as a lieutenant, even though he wasn't. So we all liked him so much. We joked about having him arrested for impersonating an officer, and like, hey, we're going to make you stay here and fly with us, you know. So, but as we got to know his background, for me personally, if my life was like this, his was that. It was the exact opposite. I'm raised in a solid Christian home. My dad was colonel and pilot and intel officer during the Cold War. Very patriotic American. One of my formative events as a child was the American Bicentennial in 1976 when I was a third grader, and was taught America was a good country with an exceptional background of God's blessing on it, and I believed all that. I really believed it, and of course the Reagan buildup. I actually saw Ronald Reagan live give a speech at George R. Brown Convention Center when I was at A&M with George Bush Sr. And so here's a guy, and his father was a communist colonel, a T-72 tank brigade XO. If the Cold War had ever gone hot, he'd have been the first guy we tried to kill coming across the Fulda Gap, and he had he'd done a tour with the Soviet Army. Joseph went to second, third grade in Moscow, spoke Russian as a second language, true believer on Red Square, and so I ended up flying with him, I think about 4 or 5 times in the contact phase. So we'd go out, maybe advanced acro, and he was, he was a dream as a student. He was one of these guys that was just very naturally very gifted, and made the instructor look really good, flying with him. And so towards the end of Alps Part 1, so they're about to move on to Alps Part 2 as this class was going to graduate. I was more interested in him as a person, really, than anything else. And I said to him one day in the flight room, I said, Jonas, I'm very intrigued by your background. All my formative years, I thought we were going to go and we're going to fight the Red Horde. You are the Red Horde. Said, what was it like, growing up in a communist country? He said, well, it wasn't all bad because at least they didn't make you go to church. And so,
to a Texas Baptist.
right. So, I had a decision to make. I can go, we don't want to talk about, well, I didn't do that. I said, really? I said, I'm a Christian. I spend most of my discretionary time at the church of my own volition. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? And so he was kind of backpedaling, going, well, because he was joking, but he said, hey, I'm an atheist because my parents are atheists. Everyone I know is an atheist. In fact, I've never even had a conversation to the contrary ever. So, well, let me be the first. So we talked. I don't even remember what I talked about, but I do remember he held my gaze. I mean, it was, and if you remember when George Bush II met Vladimir Putin, he said, I looked into his eyes and I saw his soul, and everybody thought that was ridiculous, but that's exactly how I would describe it. I looked into his eyes and I saw his soul, and so he moved on to Alps Part 2. I popped in on him once or twice to see how he's doing, talk flying, and kind of pick up the conversation where we left off. And when he was time to graduate in 1998, September, I just felt like God told me to give him a Bible. I knew he didn't have one. So I went to Walmart. I bought a cheap paperback NIV study Bible. I didn't even buy the bonded leather. I'm a pilot. I'm cheap, and so I wrote a bunch of stuff in it. I called him up and said, hey, Jonas, I got a gift I want to give you upon your graduation, which was a very European thing to do. I didn't know that. That was not on my radar screen at all. But it made an impression on him, that, hey, this is what Europeans would have done. They would have given gifts, but So I went by his dorm room, 5 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. I said, "Hey, now a major part of the story I've missed. He got interested in flying from watching a pirated copy of Top Gun that his communist father brought home for him to watch about a month before the fall of communism.
Oh my gosh.
So in the copy of Top, and they're the bad guys, you know. So this is like the fall
Yeah.
of '89. This 13-year-old boy, he the copy that he saw had a German speaking over the English and a Hungarian translating the German into Hungarian. So three different languages going.
Oh, jeez.
So a lot was lost in the translation.
Yeah.
But the international language of fast jets and beautiful women came through loud and clear, and said, "I want to be a pilot." So fast forward a decade later, he'd self-taught himself English because he knew it was the international language of aviation. He skipped his sophomore high school field trip to go watch the Thunderbirds go to Hungary for the first time. Right after the fall of communism, he went.
That
Again,
must have blown his mind.
it was a paradigm busting thing for sure. It looked like a victory lap, and go, "That's the team I would like to be on," you know. And so, and this is an evolution, from being wearing the red scarves and being a true believer. There were a lot of things I'm not, just in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into, but really critical things along the way of his childhood that led him to question communism. And social, and everything associated with it. But it was all coming together here in America, flying with the Americans. And so I went by his dorm and I said, "Look, you can get the jet, you can get the girl, you can get everything you think will make you happy, but it won't." I said, "Only Christ can do that. We have a God-sized hole in our heart. Only He can fill it. Here's a gift from me to you, Bible." And I got to tell you, Jonas, I don't know what it is, but something unique is going on in your life. Read this and have a great life, And so the best I can describe that is, if you could see a room, guys, they all look the same. They're wearing flight suits, but you watch them for a little bit and you go, "That guy's different," And that's how it was, with him. And it wasn't just because he had a funny accent. It was just the way he carried himself, all of it. And so, anyway, off he goes, and I never thought I'd see him again. Never thought I'd hear from him again. Well, he had met a girlfriend in a bar in Del Rio. I get a letter from him about a month or two later saying, "Dear Captain Wilson, I am back in the Hungarian Military Academy, finishing up my senior year. My girlfriend's living with my parents in Mesatur. In fact, we're getting married next month. Just wanted to thank you for giving me that gift. Not that I intend on reading it because I'm really busy, but it mattered to him that I cared enough about him to give him a gift."
Yeah.
So I wrote him back, said, "Hey, my name is Cliff. Don't ever call me Captain Wilson again. I can't believe that girl went back to Hungary with you. I don't know who I'm more impressed with, her or you, but anyway, read this and have a great life." And so he would write me, I would write him, and you could see his whole trajectory going. He got married, ended up his lifelong dream was to be a MiG-21 pilot in Hungary. He got assigned to Papa Air Base, Northwest Hungary, flying MiG-21s. Got a whole 12 hours in the MiG-21 when the chief of staff of the Department of Defense goes on national television. Hungary had just joined NATO. They're doing airstrikes out of Hungary and the Balkans. "We can't meet our minimal NATO obligations. Our economy is terrible. All of our equipment's antiquated. We are grounding all the MiG-21s. We're closing 2 out of 3 Hungarian air bases. And we're riffing all the peer group of officers that he had just been commissioned with. They're not going to riff him because their new NATO ally had spent about $1 million to train him. So they're going to their entire tactical air force at that point consisted of 5 MiG-29s, only 2 of which were flyable. They had 40 guys trained to fly them. They weren't going to train anymore, and they were going to assign him to a MiG-29 squadron and make him a air traffic controller."
Oh, jeez.
So he wrote me, this was October 2000. I'm a new hire pilot at Southwest Airlines. In my first year there, living in Del Rio as a major in the Air Force Reserve, flying tweets at Laughlin. just as a line, part-timer. Um, and he wrote me saying, I am not wasting my life over here. Um, my wife and I feel like our best opportunities in the land of opportunity in America. I'm resigning my commission in the Hungarian Air Force. I'm immigrating to the United States. I'm moving in with my in-laws in their spare bedroom in Del Rio. I should get there in January 2001. And if there's anything I can do to become a pilot in your Air Force, that's what I want to try to do. And if you think I'm worth it, would you help me?
Oh my gosh.
Now, the reasons why that's the impossible dream are legion. I went to my squadron commander, Colonel Whip Larson, RF4 driver, part timer, and I didn't know him very well, but I knew him well enough uh, to highly respect him. And I knew he was a people person. I knew he cared for the downtrodden. Um, and so I went and read him the letter and said, "What do you think?" And we both decided, while not impossible, highly improbable. And he said, how old do you think your boy is? I said, well, I think he's about 25. And I was right. He was getting there about a week shy of his 25th birthday.
Mhm.
He said, okay, is a legal resident alien married to an American? It's 3 years before he could apply for citizenship. Conservatively, it takes about a year to go through that process. So that would make him 29 at citizenship. You got to be in pilot training by 30. That's the cutoff,
Yep.
So
Yep.
1 year from citizenship to be selected to be an officer, trained to be an officer, selected to be a pilot, and in pilot training. And that's like trying to hit the sniper shot, with all the windage perfectly dialed in
Yeah. Yeah.
5
Yeah.
years away.
Yeah.
But not only that, he'd had to have a college degree accredited in the United States. The Hungarian Military Academy is not. He'd have to have a chief of staff of the Air Force waiver for having been in a foreign, an officer in a foreign military to even apply. So,
Yeah.
highest waiver authority in the Air Force.
Not only a foreign pilot, but a former enemy foreign pilot.
Yeah, raised in the Soviet Union,
Yeah.
dad a
Yeah.
20-year member of the Communist Party.
Yeah.
He would have to compete against all the indigenous Americans that watched Top Gun in English, who also wanted to fly. And the chances of him getting a security clearance, if all that happened, are slim to none, and Slim just left town.
Yeah.
So, but outside of that, it's looking pretty good. So I wrote him and I said, Joseph, what you're trying to do is a long shot at best. I said, but this is still the greatest country on God's green earth. It is still the land of opportunity. And I cited a couple guys I'd met at Southwest that had done some pretty compelling American dream type things. Nothing on the level that he was attempting to do, but compelling nonetheless. And I said, if the American dream, is doable for them, it's doable for you too. I said, I'm in. I don't even know what this process looks like, but I am in until we get the official thumbs up or the official thumbs down, whatever that is. And I said, but I got to say, even if we pull this off, it won't satisfy the soul. I said, only Christ can do that, but we can talk
Yeah.
about that when you get here. So call me when you get here. And so I was expecting to see him, to hear from him in early January of 2001. My wife threw a birthday party for me in January. My birthday is the 17th of January. And so we got this party going on, surprise party. I get a knock at the door, and it was Joseph and his wife, Lori. And the first thing he said to me was, "Man, you've lost weight." So I dropped maybe 15 pounds. I'd run a little
Yeah.
bit more and maybe eaten a little less.
Yeah.
From the time he knew me. But so I said, "Good to see you too." And so he came in, and as the party's winding down, I sat with him and I said, "Look," I said, I stand by everything I said. I said, I believe this is doable. I don't know how, but I believe in this country. I believe in the system." And so I said, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And nothing. I said, "Well, get on your bike and ride over here." So he had never had a car. His family eventually got a car, one of these sorry Soviet,
Yeah.
cars, living in a Russian flat. He rode his bicycle everywhere. And so he rode his bike, over to my house, and we got to work. And we felt like the only way, and this was with Colonel Larson, felt this too, that the only way this was even possible was through the Guard or Reserve, because
Mhm.
he had so many issues that had to instantaneously go away upon his citizenship with a slot for him to walk into. And I knew from having been an instructor at this point for 4 years that those guys just want good dudes who can fly, and he's a good dude and he can fly,
And he can
but he
fly.
had a baggage train a mile long of bureaucratic issues that had to go away. So that was our plan A, was to try to do everything we possibly knew to, if we had any kind of tangential connection to a Guard or Reserve unit, we were going to exploit it. And we had a whole list of people. We tried everything. I'm not a fighter guy, but if I ever had a student that just belonged in fighters, it's him. And
Joseph
and
belonged there. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Former
and so
MiG-21 driver. Yeah, I could see
right,
that.
yeah, ace the program as a 21-year-old cadet.
Yeah.
And so in his third language, and so I was we tried every fighter unit we could think of, and we had people connected in different places that we knew, something that had flown with him earlier. But it was like one step up and 12 steps back. It was, if you remember, the Air Force motto at the time was "No one comes close," especially you commie spy.
Yeah.
It was kind of a bitter joke with us. He would call units, go, "Hey, my name is Joseph. I would like to fly in your unit." No, click, and
Yeah.
I would call, and I'd talk to him for about a half hour before I got the no. And and so plan B was to try to get him hired as a ramper at Southwest, because we felt like the F-16 unit at Ellington was one that we had a best shot at. I knew guys in Houston that were flying there. And out of sight, out of mind on the border. We wanted to get him close to where we could try to pledge that unit. And so um, this is in the summer of 2001, as our optimism of January is fading a little bit in the heat of the Del Rio sun. The He went to a big interview uh, at the Hobby Hilton there, which is now the DoubleTree, for ramp positions at Southwest. And they randomly selected 8 people there out of 200 to interview, and they put the next guest guys on a list to be interviewed. So he's waiting for that call. And now I learned one very, very valuable phrase in Russian at the time, which is "malenki robota," which means we got a little work to do. After the Germans wrecked shop in Budapest, and then the Russians came in and finished it off and occupied the place after World War II. The Russians hauled, I think, 600,000 Hungarian men up to Siberia. Only 200,000 of them ever even came home. And they would say, "Maliki Robota, we got work to do in Siberia." And so at this stage of my relationship with Joseph, I was calling him Uchi. And I can't even say it the way the Hungarians say it, but it's like Uchi, which means little brother. So I go,
Hmm.
"Uchi, Maliki Robota. I got work to do in my backyard." So he would ride his bike over my house. We would lay sod in my backyard. We'd paint it. We did a lot of work, and we would debate, Christianity versus atheism. We'd go round and round and round and round. And I'd plan on my jam box. He'd come in my Christian music. He'd come in and watch Veggie Tales with me and my daughters. But it was we always came to the same fork in the road. He didn't believe there was a God, and I did. And that was kind of the crux. And so one day in about August of 2001, he was leaving my house. He was about to ride home. I said, "Look, Ichi, you don't believe in God. I do. You may think you got this wild idea to come over here and become an American pilot. I would say this God that you don't believe in is steering your boat from day one." So it was an American movie that inspired you to fly. God took you halfway around the world, first Hungarian ever to go west for pilot training, stuck you across the desk from me, told me to give you a Bible and to tell you that he's got a unique plan at work in your life. You got to admit, we pull this off, that's unique. He's like, yeah, he couldn't argue with that. Said, so if I'm right, we don't just sit around and hope it happens. We do exactly what we're doing. We run as hard as we can in the direction we think that he's leading, but it's incumbent upon us to trust him with the process. And so I want to do that. I want to pray and do that. And if you're right and there's no God, you got nothing to lose by praying, right?
Yeah.
And so he's like, yeah. So I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, Dear Lord, thank you for bringing Joseph over here. You know what we're trying to do. If it's your will that he become a pilot, you open the doors necessary to make it happen or close the doors necessary to make it happen. Just give us the eyes to see the ones that you open and to not cry over the ones that you close and to walk through them, trusting you for your glory, for our good. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. When I said that, he said to me, he goes, why would you pray for God to close a door? Because that didn't make sense. Well, again, based on my background,
Yeah.
look, I said a closed door, what we think, is not what we wanted, is often the door, open door that leads to greater success and God's blessing. He's not a vending machine.
Oh man, I believe that wholeheartedly, Cliff.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
A God's vector check. Remember I said that back a
Yeah.
while ago?
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes it's not an open door. Sometimes it's a door slammed in your face.
That's
Okay.
exactly right. Yeah.
Slammed in your face. I got
Yeah.
I
And I
got
had just
fired.
recently lived that,
I got fired as the DO of the KC-135 weapons school that I built from scratch
Yeah.
with a bunch of my buddies. Okay.
Appreciating.
4 months before 9/11.
Yeah.
Okay. I deployed 8 days after 9/11 and was doing everything I had taught at the weapons school for real,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and I can see Joseph is about to experience the very same thing.
Well, yeah. And so a month later was 9/11. Um, and and so as I described where I was on that day,
Mhm.
it was I didn't have television. I'd gotten rid of my cable TV when I got hired at Southwest. I just didn't have the money for it. So got rid of
Right.
that. And that after Drew Cage's funeral, I'd gone home, didn't see any footage of it. I tucked my daughters in that night, said it's going to be all right. And I had not seen any coverage of that. So I called Joseph and I said, can I come over your apartment? Now, at this point, he's living in an apartment in Del Rio. And I said, can I come over your house there and watch it? And we sat on his couch and watched over and over as the towers crashed and burned. And as the towers crashed and burned on 9/11, his lifelong dream of being a pilot crashed and burned. In his mind, he had given it everything he knew in Hungary, standing right on the precipice of great success, only to have it
Yeah.
wash away. Here we are 9 months into this effort with absolutely no, tangible positive results. And again, the plan B was to try to get hired as Rampart Southwest. Well, Continental announced 12,000 furloughs the next day. Southwest announced a hiring freeze. The whole industry started going in reverse, and he's not getting hired anywhere. So 2 days later, both in word and deed, Joseph Jonas gave up on his dream and enlisted in the United States Army and
Oh wow.
incurred a 6-year active duty service commitment to the Army, which took him beyond the age of ever being an Air Force pilot. And I told him, I said, look, I know you've given up on your dream. I haven't. I serve a big God and do big things. I don't know how it's going to happen any more than you do. I said, but the day may come where you're standing before a general or somebody who's able to make this happen for you. And when that day comes, you better be ready, willing, and able to fire for effect, to
Yeah.
take your shot, you don't want any reasons for them not to want to help you. America loves an underdog, be that underdog. I said, go be all you can be, in the Army. And so I said, and you're going to stand out in the Army, not just because you have a funny accent. And so he went off to pilot training. Army boot camp the next month, Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Now, let me pause it right there. One thing we did do immediately upon him coming back to the States, we sent his transcript from the Hungarian Military Academy off to an accreditation service in Florida. They cashed a check, $600. 3 months later, came back, cha-ching, equivalent to a U.S. degree in aeronautical engineering and military science.
Really?
Yeah, we were both.
Wow.
Yeah, but he's a college boy now, so that was one of our major obstacles
Hmm.
gone. And and so he came out of boot camp as an E4 instead of a E2, which was great, And he made more money equivalent as an E4 day one than his father ever made as a colonel in the Hungarian army.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and so he got assigned to our most famed Army division, Screaming Eagles of Fort Campbell, Kentucky, Air Assault, 101st Airborne, and was going to be a Chinook aircraft mechanic. So he went to Chinook, so if you can't fly, and he couldn't as a non-American, but he wanted to work on it, and so he went to Chinook Aircraft Mechanic School at Fort Eustis, Virginia, and did better in that course than anyone had ever done. He did not miss one question um, the whole 4 months he was there. So again, here's a guy who's just a sterling performer, and again was signed to 101st Airborne, Fort Campbell. Got there, I think, in June of 2002, and with about a month on station, was asked to be a crew chief, which again, exceptional. They take
Yeah.
the most experienced guys, and so he's systematically doing exactly what I thought he would do, just blowing doors.
Yeah.
And so all I'm doing at this process at this point is praying, which I've been doing all
Yeah.
along,
Yeah.
but there's nothing I can do to try to turn it in our favor that I knew of anyway. And so 4th of July, 2002. So we're already at war in Afghanistan. Storm clouds of war starting to brew for Iraq. I think President Bush made his first speech. I want to say at West Point.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a West
Um,
Point speech. It was the West Point speech.
yeah, doctrine of preemptive strike.
Yeah.
Condoleezza Rice. We don't want the next mushroom.
Yeah.
Focus
Raised a
mushroom.
lot of eyebrows. Raised a lot of eyebrows around the world.
Right. And so you can see where this is going. And so I was home at my parents' house to go on a trip, at Southwest. 4th of July, my mom hands me a article from the Houston Chronicle, just a cutout. President Bush, 4th of July ceremony at a military base in Virginia, signs an executive order that all foreign nationals serving on active duty in the war on terror are immediately eligible for citizenship.
Huh.
And that's to thank them for serving our country and
Yeah.
enable them to further their military careers by being eligible for programs only open to U.S. citizens. I'm like, bingo. That's
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 it.
that's the open door. And so I called them and I said, "Hey, Uchi, you sitting down?" And I read it to him. I said, "That's it. That's our door." And so he immediately applied for citizenship. The INS, Immigration and Naturalization Service, immediately cashed his check. Told him it would take 6 to 9 months before citizenship. Yeah. Call me crazy. We're at war. Commander in Chief says he's eligible.
Yeah.
In my mind, he should be able to raise his right hand and swear him in. But
Yeah.
the wheels of justice turn slowly.
Yeah. Yeah. Working at the speed of government.
Right.
Working at
But
the speed
remember,
of government.
We got a 5 year sand in the hourglass. We've already burned a year and a half of it, and on
Yeah.
top of all of our other obstacles, we got to get him out of the army that's mobilizing for war. And so the and the immigration policy of the United States at the time was you had to be in the United States to be sworn in as a citizen. You couldn't take the oath of office or oath of citizenship
Yeah.
from an embassy or from Saddam's palace. Saddam was still in the palace.
Yeah.
And so if the 101st were going to deploy, which we knew they would, um, before he got his citizenship, then all bets are off.
Yeah.
So we're at another race against the clock here. So, and we had 9 months of trying to engage with the Air Force with absolutely no positive results. But I decided, okay, now I've got the wind at my sails with executive orders in the Army, post 9/11, all those things. I need somebody with positional power that's willing to leverage that power for us, for Joseph. I had no power. I'm just a line IP, as low on the rungs of power as you can get, flying a tweet at Laughlin. Um, but the one guy who'd been helpful to us at this point was Whip Larson, Glenn Larson, and now he had been promoted to bird colonel. He was back on active duty, reserve advisor to the 4-star PACAF commander out in Hawaii, General Begert. Um, and and Colonel Larson had even volunteered. He was going to hire Joseph into our 97th, our 96th reserve squadron, was going to create an overage position for him, hire him against it, and that ultimately failed because there was no pot of money to send him to boot camp, and then he got promoted and left the scene. Then 9/11, but I circled back around to him out in Hawaii, and said, sir, we need help. Let me back up. Before that, there was one colonel on the base that I thought might be, amiable to what I'm trying to do here. He was Christian, Eagle driver, and I knew who he was. I thought he maybe knew who I was, and I made an appointment to go see him and say, hey, sir, here's what I'm trying to do. And I told him the story, and his response to me is, Cliff, not a chance. It ain't going to happen.
Yeah.
They will never give him a security clearance. And it was not what I was hoping to hear. But I begged to differ with him in the from August 2001 to now. This is 2002 summer. I had found the guy doing background investigations on the camp, at Laughlin, who every 3 weeks a new class graduates. Somebody needs a TS clearance. This guy interviewing him. I pulled him aside and go, hey, come here. Give me 5 minutes. Hypothetically speaking, what if, and I gave him the story. This guy was literally wiping tears from his eyes of just inspiration, of what we're trying to do. I said, what do you think? He goes, I hope I never get assigned this guy's, thing.
Case. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it would be tough. I said, but he goes, we just collect data, which is what I knew. He goes, and if we find something problematic in this guy's background, we forward it to the gaining unit commander. If they want him, they can take him. And if not, they don't have to. But what we're looking for is the whole person concept. Can this individual be trusted with our nation's secrets? And I knew Joseph well, and I knew he could be trusted. And I knew that everybody that knew him in 98 would vouch for him. Everybody who knew him in the Army would vouch for him too, probably at war, and maybe even pilot training again, would vouch for him if he ever got to that point. So I told this colonel, I said, I disagree with you. But if you were me, what would you do? So he started giving me, well, call these guys, these, the Sea of No at AFPC, at all the flesh peddlers there, and so I did. I started making phone calls, and every creative way you can hear "no way" is what I got, and so I finally talked to this colonel, and he goes, sir, Major, this is never going to happen. This guy's a square peg that doesn't fit into a round hole. There's no route for a guy with his background to come into, in the Army, enlisted, going to war, to come into the Air Force as a pilot, which I knew all that. He said, if you want action, you got to come down the chain of command from a general or a congressman or something. I said, okay. So that's when I reconnected with Larson, Colonel Larson, out in Hawaii. And I emailed him, sir, this is what happened since you left the scene. 9/11, joined the Army, executive order. We need help. And he wrote me back, said, Cliff, that's a heartwarming story. I would be happy to help in any way I can, including advocating to a general officer if need be. Yeah. And so literally the first segue of potential help from the Air Force. And so this was July 2002. all the way to November 2002. So during this, and we're waiting, time's ticking. Storm clouds of war brewing. They're making the
Yeah,
case at the United Nations to go to, Iraq.
yeah, to go to
Pound.
Baghdad. Yeah, they're making plans to go to Baghdad because I'm working
Yeah.
on them at that time period. I'm
Oh,
working
wow.
on the 1003 Victor plan
Yeah.
the summer of 2002. Okay. Got
Right.
read in, said, okay, Sluggo, here it is. 1003 Victor plan. There's going to take down Baghdad. And I went, you're kidding. Nope, we're not kidding.
What I like to say is that even though in the court of public opinion, the jury was still out, the verdict had been whispered in all the bases
Yeah,
all around the world
yep,
long before
yep,
that.
absolutely.
And so, at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, Joseph's, 24-hour war footing, shrink wrapping their helicopters, putting them on, trains to be, sent from Norfolk to undisclosed locations in the Middle East.
Yeah.
I was on an overnight and I started staffing this thing out. And I'm not a staff guy, but I started getting, I got letters of recommendation from guys all over the Air Force, an Eagle driver in Lakenheath, another one in England, a friend he'd met that was an intel officer that he met on his visit to the academy, who was a friend of his, vouching for him. Female F-16 pilot that was in his class, Donna Kohout, and instructors that knew him, Alps Part 1 commander, Alps Part 2 commander, Timmerhausen flying C-130s at Louisville.
Yeah.
Hugh Miklos flying, B-1 bombers at Ellsworth. And I got his grade book from him when he was there in 98. Aced the program, not one busted check ride. All four of his check rides were excellence. No more than 4 downgrades, and I sent all that stuff to Hawaii to Colonel Larson. And I was on an overnight in Tampa when I get a call from Hawaii from Colonel Larson saying, "Hey Cliff, this is Whip Larson. I talked to a friend of mine, buddy back from the zoo back in the day, Brigadier General Ed Rice. I told him I know Joseph. He's the kind of guy we want. General Rice is on board. Here's the guy's going to help you." And gave me a name to call.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure it's a guy that told me I had to come down the chain of command, like 6 months before. So I called this guy and I'm name dropping, star dropping as much as I can. I'm like, "This is Major Wilson calling on behalf of, Colonel Whip Larson, Reserve Advisor, 4-star General Beggart, and your boss, General Rice, wanted me to call you because he wants Specialist Jonas, United States Army, to be an Air Force pilot." It's like protracted sounds of crickets, on the other line.
Yeah.
And he said, "I don't know how they got my name. That's not what we do here. That's never going to happen." And started giving me the rug dance. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
I had it about up to here at this point, and I said, "Look, if this was easy, I would do it. Your boss wants it to happen. Make it so, Co. This is, and I said, I think I talked to you about this very thing, month." He goes, "Well, I had no email traffic. I didn't email you. I called you. Well, I can't recall. I get a lot of phone calls, and
Yeah.
So I called Colonel Larson back, said, "This guy's giving me the rug dance." He said, "Yeah, he did me too, but we got a general officer energizing this now. Give it some time." And so I did. The very next day, "Hey, sir, you need to call this guy." Boom, 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 boom. And I hit the wellspring of power in the Air Force. Ex-Sergeant Jake Davis, NCIC for recruiting for the Southern region of the United States in the Nashville Recruiting Center. "How can I help you, sir?" I said, "Your boss, General Rice," and that's all I had to say. And so in December of 2002, as we're about to mobilize for war, Joseph Jonas came down at a first opportunity and started the paper trail. And the approved solution was going to be they're going to allow him to apply for rated officer selection through OTS,
Yep.
waiting his citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
And so he took the Air Force officer qualifying test, aced it, did better than any candidate.
Imagine that.
Yeah, which I flunked it the first time I took it. Again, we're opposites. And he took a pre-commissioning physical, sent the chief of staff of Air Force waiver request with General Rice endorsement up to Washington, all the stuff necessary. And the one piece of the puzzle that we're missing is citizenship. And so Joseph is no dummy. He realized, as far as the 101st is considered, I'm just a funny talking number. And so he had made sure that any correspondence having to do with his citizenship came to him personally or to his wife, not to the 101st.
Yeah.
So
yeah, keep the 101st out of this.
right. They had other things on their mind.
Yeah.
Honestly, so
Yeah. Specialist Jonas is going with us. Thank you
right.
very
And,
much.
and so I had fortuitously had an overnight in Nashville right before all this. Joseph and his wife came down and had dinner with me, and I said, "Look, we're not going to let your dream wither on our watch. We're going to stay the course while you're gone." And so 8 months into his wait for citizenship, need to know only, boys, we're leaving tomorrow. Last thing he did was check his mailbox, check his email, check no citizenship. Off he goes to war. So we were that close, only to have it gone. And so he's gone. He doesn't know where he's going. We don't know where he's going. There's no cell phones. He ended up on the border of Kuwait, reassembling their helicopters amidst those sandstorms and stuff.
Yeah. Getting ready for the
I
invasion
heard,
of Iraq.
I heard, his wife, Lori, and I decided, look, the INS said it could take 9 months. We're going to give him 10. But if 10 months from this executive order comes and we haven't heard anything definitive on citizenship, we're going to start raising Cain. So the war kicks off March 19th of 2003. Joseph air assaulted with the 101st Airborne as a door gunner on the 50 cal. Crew chief on Chinook, in support of the 3rd ID up the Karbala Gap. He with
all of his MiG-21 experience.
Right. They ended up ultimately in Mosul in northern Iraq. He was part of the operation that killed Uday and Qusay Hussein. So while he's doing all that, 8 months, 9 months, 10 months comes and goes. And I told his wife to come to Del Rio for the weekend, and I made an appointment for us to see the mayor of Del Rio, Dora Alcala. Now, I didn't know Dora Alcala, but I knew of her. We had a young man, a Marine from Del Rio that had been killed in Afghanistan. She had spoken at a memorial for him and was very eloquent, very heartfelt. Everybody talked about it. So I knew she had a heart for our troops from Del Rio. So if you were to ask Joseph, where are you from? Thick Eastern European accent, you hear Del Rio, Texas, that's his hometown in America. And so we could only coordinate our schedules it was 9 o'clock on a Friday night. So we went to her kitchen on 9 o'clock on a Friday night, told her the story as Providence would have it. Her daughter had married a Alp student from Bolivia. So she was very familiar with all of that.
The process.
Yeah. And so she wrote the following day, President George Bush, Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, Senator John Cornyn, and
all the Houston people.
Yeah, and Henry Bonilla, our representative there in Del Rio, asking for help. And it's like, you take that shot downrange, you got to wait for the battle damage assessment, to see if you hit anything. And we waited, and we waited, and we waited. And I would run into her periodically. She'd ask about her anything. No, she hadn't either. And 4th of July 2003 is rolling around now, and we've heard nothing from anybody on these letters she wrote. So our Congressman Henry Bonilla was going to be leading the 4th of July parade through Del Rio, waving the American flag and the convertible. So I, with the blessing of the mayor, I accosted him at the end of the parade, wearing my flight suit, wearing my aviator glasses, looking the part as best I knew how. I said, "Sir, I need to talk to you." I said, "I've got a letter written right here from her to you 2.5 months ago asking for help on behalf of one of our troops from Del Rio. And he looked at it and said, well, she sent to the wrong address. I said, is this the address she got from your representative here? And he said, yeah, but she should have sent this other address. I said, well, be that as it may, I mean, we need help. He said, where's he living? I said, he's living in Iraq, fighting for your freedom and mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
He's in Mosul right now, sir.
yeah. And so, well, where is he based? So he's based at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. So, well, that's not my district. And it's the rules are clear. I can't. And again, I'd about had it up to here. I
Oh
said,
yeah.
sir, all I'm asking for is a phone call. You can do that, right? And so he went off to the stage where all the politicians were gathering to make Fourth of July speeches. And all the people are sitting down at this amphitheater. So I went and stood with my arms crossed and glared at him about 20 feet in front of him. If you're going to do nothing, you're going to look me in the eye and do nothing. And so, and it was extremely disappointing. So I called Lori and I told her about my very disappointing encounter with the Honorable. Yeah. Well, Congressman Whitfield from the 1st Congressional District in Kentucky was going to be coming to Fort Campbell that day to glad hand with the troops of the 101st. So I told her, you go stand in line as briefly as possible. Tell him your husband's story and do not take no for an answer, no matter what. So he promised to help her in front of earshot of his people. And for about 3 weeks, she mercilessly hounded the office of congressman. So they told us that back in March, a month after Joseph deployed, they'd sent a letter. The INS had sent a letter not to him or to his wife, but to the 101st. And he didn't show up for his appointment. And if he doesn't care, we don't care. Case closed. Archived it. So not only are we not, we're further away from citizenship than we had been a whole year.
All because he's in Mosul.
Yeah, and they'd archived his case. He didn't care enough to show up to be sworn as a citizen, and so he's persona non grata as far as the INS was concerned. And so it was infuriating. Lori kicked down every door at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, till she found it. It was sitting on somebody's desk being used as a coaster. And when I finally got her to calm down, I said, look, what God meant for evil, what they meant for evil, God meant for good. I said, if this is ever going to happen, we would not have without expressed, and Joseph had already demonstrated, he didn't want us to go into Congress asking for help because he wanted to just do it on his own merit.
Yeah.
We did. We'd asked them for help. And this is the only way it's going to happen. And so anyway, nothing's going our way. It's 130 degrees in the shade in Mosul. The city insurgency's cranking up. I'd taken a month off at Southwest Airlines to go to Pitt for the T6 Texan 2. So they're drawing down the T-37 at Laughlin. And I could have just faded out with that, but I had unfinished business there.
Yeah.
And so I had to, again, with my track record and formal training programs, it was, I had to really think hard whether I wanted to do that again, but I did. Went to learn the brand new T6 Texan 2, which was great. And I got into this big cyber debate with Jozef over email. So now they've got email set up at Mosul. They can, dodge mortar rounds, stand in line for an hour, get 10 minutes on the computer. He'd send me a very cryptic, 10-minute email, quick email. And I would bloviate for, 3 pages. And we'd started this kind of dialogue. And it ended up, and I didn't intend it to go this way, but it did, where we get up one of these, backyard discussions of theology from him in Northern Iraq and me here, back in the States. And he even started with a joke, like, hey, God found this atheist who wanted to put him to a test. Hey, I can put these electrodes in the dirt and for life. And God's like, wait a minute, get your own dirt, and that was what Joseph started, this email with, that he's no longer denying any of the things I've been trying to advance with him. And then, but he just doesn't need it. And so it was it was like a gut punch
Yeah.
to the solar plexus. I tried to get it back on firmer ground of just trying to help him get in the Air Force, but just depressing, and so about that time, I said, "Hey, Joseph, as we're trying to get back into normal conversations, I said, you just had a great day. I don't know why, but I think things are about to sweep you into the Air Force, into my cockpit and all this kind of stuff. You're going to love the Tango 6. I just pulled 3,000 foot close pull up to high key, and was telling them about, the power of it and just all of that. And I got a call. I was stepping to the jet and I get a call from the mayor of Del Rio's office saying, "Hey, we just got a call from Senator John Cornyn's office. They got our letter. They want help, and we don't know what to tell them. What do we tell them?" I said, "Can I represent you to the mayor, to the senator?" And they said, "Yeah, absolutely." So I left the squadron 559th there. I called Sergeant Davis out in recruiting center in Nashville. "Hey, what would you say to a senator?" He goes, "Sir, I can't call a senator." I go, "I know, I'm gonna have him call you this afternoon." So our plan was to use the good name of John Cornyn and the full
Yeah.
power of the United States Senate and just bash everybody and every
Yeah.
obstacle.
Yeah. Whack-a-mole all the way down the line.
Yeah. And so we had our plan. I called Senator Cornyn's office, said, "This Major Wilson representing Mayor Akala. Understand you want to help. This is what you need to do to help. Call Sergeant Davis." I called Lori, said, "Lori, drop what you're doing. You call Joseph in Iraq or you email him. You tell him you can find your first sergeant. You tell him everything about pilot training in Hungary or Hungarian Military Academy,
Yeah.
MiG-21,
Everything.
pilot training, all of that." And I said, because they're about to hear about it and you want to hear about it from you first. And so then I went flew. Everything I was hoping was happening in Iraq, in Nashville, in Kentucky, and Dallas was. Yeah. And long story short, it all ended up on Joseph's brigade commander's desk in the middle of the night in Iraq. How can we help? I said, you can send him home from Iraq on emergency leave with his to be sworn in as a U.S. citizen with his conditional release from the Army. And that's exactly what they agreed to do.
Wow.
And yeah, it was the plan worked to perfection at that point. And so now he was low priority. Every transport coming out of northern Iraq is broken and
Yeah.
dead bodies.
Yeah.
But in October 17th, at a special ceremony in Dallas, set up by Senator Cornyn's staff, because somehow the INS had managed to archive his case again, and they grabbed it. Go, we're doing it in Texas, where we can manage it. Jozef was sworn in as a United States citizen. He was there in his Screaming Eagle patch, beret, jump boots, and I had a trip. I mean, you threw all the balls up and they landed there. I had a trip with Southwest that day, but I made sure they cut me loose to go to that, and I was there. Mayor of Del Rio was there and her entourage, and I walked in to see them. They were going to swear in maybe 200 people for citizenship, but they saw me in uniform. They said, "Are you with Jonas?" And I said, "Yes, I am." Follow me, took me upstairs, and they had made everybody stop what they're doing and come witness his swearing in. There are probably 40 people in the room, and the head gal of the INS said, "We do things on a daily basis here that are frankly depressing, but this one's different." And she gave a speech. She asked me to say a few words. There wasn't a dry in the room. They presented him an American flag flown over the Capitol by Senator Cornyn. Extremely moving.
Yeah.
He, skipping over some minor details, he went, the Sunni insurgencies cranking up in northern Iraq.
Yep.
Originally, they were wanting him to stay home and just finish this, go to the Air Force and do great things. But they needed him back. So he went back to Mosul. He flew in combat on MVGs with the American flag presented to him by Senator Cornyn, affixed to the ceiling of a Chinook, literally fighting under the flag. His division finally got orders to come home in January 2001. We're reaching for the Holy Grail. We've got the package is complete. We got the waiver from General John Jumper, Chief of Staff of the Air Force. We've got the education. We've overcome the INS, the Army, and there's a rated officer selection board meeting the last week in January. Stop loss. No one can get out of the Army.
Oh, no.
And they started hauling guys back in, and the Ready Reserve that had been out for 6 years. You remember that?
Yeah, I do.
And it didn't apply to him because we already had his release from the Army, but the Army put a freeze on his package till they could determine that it didn't apply to him, and he missed the board. And you could have punched us both right in the solar plexus. It wouldn't have hurt worse. Yeah. In his mind, this is just not meant to be. I don't. Yeah. I don't understand.
Yeah, you got to be depressed at this point. You got to be depressed at this point because, all these things are. This is a lot of dominoes to add to fall over.
Yeah.
And how does he finally make it to pilot training?
Well, there was tentative.
If I remember right, you told me he's flying Hogs. He ends up flying A-10s. So how does he get the pilot training?
Well, so there was supposed to be a board meet 4 months later, tentatively, and they may or may not meet. But I said, we've waited this long, we can wait 4 months. And interestingly, he was doing one of these, hey, moving rocks, rearranging rocks on the flight line or something at Fort Campbell in the spring of waiting for this board. And a Laughlin T-38 comes taxiing by, with the cool breeze with the visor down.
Oh no.
Canopy. The big tail on the tail, you can't get here and he watched him, lower the canopy and light the cans and take off.
They go.
And he goes back to, whatever FOD walk or whatever he's doing. And so finally the board met in middle of May of 2004. The results were supposed to be out no later than the last week in May of 2004.
Yeah.
2 weeks into June, we've heard nothing.
Yeah.
But Ronald Reagan, God rest his soul, passed away in the first week of June of 2004. He was being eulogized. The leaders the world over, state funeral. The most poignant of which I thought was Maggie Thatcher.
Oh, absolutely. They had an incredible bond.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And so her and I'm paraphrasing her speech, but she basically said, this great man had the singular vision to recognize that communism would collapse under the weight of its own lies. And he had the fortitude to press down upon it at every weak point until it did, until a man of, good faith materialized. And so now the great liberator is being mourned not only in Washington and London, but in Budapest and in Bucharest and in Warsaw, listed all the capital cities of the former Warsaw Pact countries. For opening up the lot of freedom and opportunity to the long oppressed people of Eastern Europe. So on that day, I get a call from Sergeant Davis, and we've been back and forth. Have you heard anything? Have you heard anything? No. Have you heard anything? And he goes, Major Wilson, Sergeant Davis. Yes, he goes. We got the results, and he said, we're celebrating the Air Force's newest pilot selectee, Specialist Joseph Jonas. I said, yeah. And so I hung up with him and I called Jozef immediately and I go, hey, have you heard anything? No. Have you? I said, yes. And I said, we did it, brother. Thumbs up. You're in.
Going to pilot training.
And so I could hear his boss, I think his name is Major Fleckenstein, yelling at him in the background to come into his office where he goes, oh, I got to go. So he ran into that guy's office where he chewed his butt because before Sergeant Davis called me, he called this guy and said, hey, your troop just got picked up to be an Air Force pilot. I said, well, how can we tell him? And Davis said, well, back when I was a cop, if we had something good happen to somebody unexpected, we'd arrest him, we'd throw him in jail, we'd bring him up on bogus charges, and then we'd tell him. So
And of course, the
They had
Army's
a
going to do
rash.
that to him. The
Oh
Army's going
yeah.
to do that to him
So
because he's deployed.
well, so he's back now. I mean, the division had come home in January. So
Okay.
he's back at Fort Campbell now.
But
But
still, the Army's going to mess with his head.
so that the previous day, Joseph's Chinook, that he was the crew chief on, had gone on a routine training mission and they had over torqued one of their engines. Not a huge deal, but they had had a rash of maintenance
Yeah.
issues in that aviation company.
Yeah.
So the major took the opportunity to chew Joseph's butt and go, I'm tired of this kind of stuff happening. You guys, are slacking. We're going to have a mandatory formation this afternoon on the flight line to deal with it. And you better be able to defend yourself. Now get out of here. So his whole release from the Army was predicated on being having
Yeah.
no problems with the Army. So all day he's like, I have no idea what I'm going to say in defense. He'd never been accused of anything
Yeah.
ever. So they get out on the flight line that afternoon. Company 10 Jonas front and center. So he goes up to the front of the company to take it like a man. The firing squad, whatever's
Yeah.
comes his
Yeah.
way.
Here comes the bullet. Here comes the bullet.
And from behind the hangar on the flight line at Fort Campbell comes Sergeant Davis, Lori, his wife, Sergeant Music, who was another recruiter who'd worked tireless on it, Air Force captain.
Yeah.
They come up to the front. Sergeant Davis tells the story, gives him, presents him a bunch of Air Force paraphernalia, no one comes close, aim high,
Yeah.
all these kind of things. And it was, I wasn't there, but evidently there was, not a dry in the room there
Oh,
either.
I'm sure.
So I don't know how Davis did it. I don't want to know how he did it, but 3 weeks later, he had an OTS slot for him.
Wow.
So Uncle Mo's on your side, momentum at your back.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Winds
three
in your
weeks later,
sails.
I personally swore him into the Air Force at the Nashville Recruiting Center, where he went off to OTS for 2.5 months. While he was there, I had one more rabbit I need to pull out of the hat. I needed him to come to pilot training at Laughlin.
Yeah.
This is a Del Rio story. He's a Del Rio boy.
Yeah.
Del
Yeah.
Rio.
Let's bring him here.
So the guy that I knew that could make that happen was Colonel Killer Quast, Steve Quast.
Oh, great individual. Great
Yeah,
guy. I've
he was
never
OT at
heard a
Laughlin.
bad thing about Quast.
He is a truly exceptional individual, and in rarefied air that I didn't typically hang out in, but
Yeah.
but I needed his help, and so
Yeah.
I made a appointment to have lunch with him at the Officers Club at Laughlin, and I said, "Sir, he's got to come to pilot training here, not to there." And he goes, "Cliff, if you need me to fly to Randolph to talk to somebody to make this happen, I'm happy to do so." And he really meant it, and
Yeah.
I knew he meant it. That's all I needed. This Major Wilson calling on behalf of Killer Quast, 47th Flying Training Wing OG. He wants Cadet Jonas at this OTS class to come to Laughlin to pilot training. It took me a week or two of calls to divvy it down to the right person at the
Yeah.
right cubicle who puts out the pilot training slots. And I got him assigned to Laughlin. But the soonest they could get him a slot was 6 months after his graduation. And to me, that seemed, I'm not willing to risk another 6
Yeah.
months of
Yeah.
geopolitics, working against me. And so I went to the phase one guys. So you remember pilot training, you show up phase one,
Yeah.
you do the academics and the parachute landing falls and
Yeah. Yeah.
flight speed and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I went to those guys in the OSS and I said, look, here's the deal. Is there any way you can get this sooner? They pull out the master calendar, go, when'd your boy get out of OTS? I said, right here. Well, we had a guy show up yesterday for a class that starts a week later than that. He asked off to get married and just swapped him. So, so Joseph graduated from OTS, drove straight to Laughlin Air Force Base, reported for pilot training less than 1 year from becoming a United States citizen by 1 week.
Wow.
Shacked it from 5 years out.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
And he went back to Fort Campbell. When his division came home in January, his wife was now amongst, I think, 4,000 babies due in October. So while he was at OTS, his wife was on the mother of all baby showers on the Oprah Winfrey Show, where they're first on, and he was the 1 week he had
Yeah,
nothing going on. He was there for the firstborn, his daughter Maria being born,
yeah,
and came back, started pod training at Thanksgiving. A month later, came and moved his family back to Del Rio. And in January 2005, Second Lieutenant, United States Air Force, Joseph Jonas, dollar ride in the T-6 Texan 2 was my Finney flight in the Air Force.
oh jeez.
So out with the old, in with the new. I
Yep.
flew with them one last time. We had
Yeah,
30 people from all over the world there to watch,
yeah,
including his parents from Hungary, first time to America. Colonel
yeah,
Larson was there.
yeah,
Uh, Alps Part 1, 2 Commander Quentin
yeah,
Miklos, kids from St. James. I didn't even tell you that part of the story, but people who knew him, the mayor of Del Rio, and I started it all. I gathered everybody up in the ops building, and I said, "Look, I said, finally, brothers, whatever's true, whatever's noble, whatever's right, whatever's pure, whatever's lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." I said, his story is all the above,
yeah,
and I would stop about every 2 minutes or two sentences so he could translate into Hungarian for his parents.
yeah,
Um, and I said, look, the dollar ride is a long Air Force tradition. Some people there knew that, and some people didn't.
yeah,
I said it's where the rubber finally hits the runway. It's the first plane. It's the only ride in the program where nothing is demanded of the student other than to be alive at the end of it. And I said it's total show and tell. So we're gonna go fly. We're gonna strap on the T-6. I'm gonna teach them everything I know in one sortie. And and I said, but without the mayor over there, who opened up her home on a Friday night at 9 o'clock, put her credibility on the line to get the help of Senator Cornyn, this wouldn't have happened. Without Colonel Will Larson, who was the one guy willing to stick his neck out and to get us the help we needed to get the Air Force on board, this wouldn't have happened. Without these children from St. James Episcopal School who prayed for Mr. Jonas for 4 years, none of this would have happened. Without his parents who taught their son to live in the direction of his dreams, even if it took him to their enemy camp,
yeah.
and willingly gave up him to serve our country, this wouldn't have happened. I said, so while we may be flying, you guys are the wind beneath our wings. So we went out to the flight line. Everybody watched us do the very painfully slow dollar ride walk around of the T-6, get all strapped in. He got the takeoff. I got the full stop. I taught him everything I knew in one sortie, and which wasn't much. And and that was the end of my illustrious flying career in the Air Force and beginning of his. He went on to ace the program in the T-6. And to give you an idea how well he did in T-6 is at a pilot training base, roughly 3,000 student check rides in a year, equally divided between goods, excellence, and unsats.
Yeah,
Once in a blue moon, somebody will get an outstanding.
yeah,
2 out of 4 of his check rides were outstandings, and the other 2 were excellence. So
yeah.
um,
Well, he's
and
been flying MiGs for crying out
well,
loud, you know.
yes,
He's got flying time, so
but
it's not new to him.
but there's other
Yeah.
guys with flying time in that program too.
Oh, I understand that.
And
I
and
understand that. But he's used
and
to being in a fast wing
no, you're
airplane.
right. Yeah, I expected nothing less from him.
Yeah,
But it had been 7 years. It had been a while since he'd flown,
yeah,
and so
yeah. But it's just like riding a bike, man. You know
yeah.
that.
But he so the day they track selected, where he chose the fighter bomber track T-38s, that day was the last BRAC commission where they closed Ellington F-16 unit. So
Mhm.
that was our target all along. Even if we had gotten what we wanted,
Yeah,
it wouldn't have. But he's
yeah,
not a Guard Reserve guy. He's active duty. And so he ended up, flying T-38s, ended up flying with Colonel Todd Walters, the wing commander.
yeah.
He went
Another
on to
great
be
individual. Another great guy.
Supreme NATO Allied Commander
Yeah,
down and graduated #1 in his class, got his first choice, the A-10, which you probably know, that's not a conventional first choice usually.
No. Uh-uh.
It's usually the F-15, F-16. But he'd spent a year in Iraq. He
With
was on
the
the
Army,
ground
with
with
the
the
Army
Army.
guys. Yeah.
No better friend to the
Yeah.
Army than Hawg.
Then the Hogs.
And that's the community he felt like he fit best fit in. And so against the advice of a lot of people, he took the A-10. And the had he chosen F-15s, they started falling apart in flight when he would have been learning to fly them.
Yeah.
So and for a mission that really didn't exist, air superiority in the two wars going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he chose F-16s. About the time he would have been mission qualified is when they took, a whole fiscal year of him, went, sorry, needs of the Air Force, and
Yeah.
made him Predator pilots. But as it turned out, he went to the 75th Fighter Squadron.
Famous squadron.
Ended up the C model A-10, flew 300 hours combat time. In fact, with Donk out there as his OPSO,
Oh, really? Yeah.
Afghanistan. Yep.
Yeah. Doc,
And
great individual. As you know, I've had him on.
right. And so all that was in the future, but finally he graduated, top of his class. I tried to sell hey, so I'm going to sell my home. We're going to move to Brenham, Texas, which is where I currently live, and live happily ever after. I could not sell my house to save my life. It's a whole nother saga. Ended up, it was really painful, but finally, a whole year later, I sold my house. So finally, Del Rio in the rearview mirror. I'm
Yeah.
closure after, I'd busted that check ride. I thought I was going to be there 3 years. I'm there 10 years, but I sold the house. I'm going to go there one last time, get my last stuff. This is my last time in Del Rio. I've done my job there. And I didn't even know if Joseph was there because he had survival training, water survival,
Yeah.
IFF to go to.
Yeah.
And but I called him. I said, "Hey, I'm going to be in town one last time Friday night. Are you there?" He goes, "Yeah, I just got back from survival training." I said, "Okay, well, why don't you meet me downtown for dinner?" And so he and his wife and daughter did, and we met there. And as the sun's setting over Mexico, we're basking in our success. He said, "Hey, I wanted to tell you personally that I just got back from survival training while sitting in my Air Force prison survival training cell in solitary confinement for 16 hours, just chewing on all this. I became a Christian. I'm now a follower of Jesus Christ."
And you're like going, what?
I said, Joseph, I've been calling you Uchi all these years, which means little brother. I said, but this is the first time I can truly call you my brother.
Yeah.
There's the story.
So when's the book coming out? You're writing. I got to tell my audience, you're trying to capture all this in a book. Do you even have a name for the book yet?
Well, my working name is Not a Chance. And it's meant
that's
as
your email. Yeah, not a chance. Okay.
yeah, it's meant as a double meaning. There's not a
Yeah.
chance it's
Oh
going to
yeah.
happen, but this was not a chance. This was sovereignly orchestrated by God, and the nothing we tried worked until it all worked.
Yeah.
And it now I've written the book. It is written. I've edited it to the best I can get it.
Yeah.
I'm in the process of trying to get a legitimate agent and publisher.
Uh-huh.
And that's what I'm doing right now.
I might be able to help you with that.
I would love to help. So, but and honestly, I never aspired to be an author. But as Joseph and I were living this story,
Yeah.
we just believed it was a book worthy story. We would joke about it. We'd say, "Oh, there'll be a whole chapter on this," and that was we did not anticipate 9/11 or going to war or all the crazy ways it went. And when it was all said and done, we just felt like this is more book worthy than anything we could have
Yeah.
scripted. And so it's been a labor of love ever since. I've got it written. It's all down there. And
Okay.
and that's what I'm trying to do.
Tell you what, you and I need to talk offline about that. Okay.
Okay.
Because I can, um, I was lucky. Rush
Yeah.
Limbaugh was my agent.
I remember
Okay.
hearing you on Rush.
Yeah. Rush Limbaugh
Yep.
was my agent, but I still have a lot of contacts at Simon and Schuster.
Yeah.
So we'll talk offline about that.
Love
Okay.
it.
And I'll send you my book proposal.
that'd be
that
great.
they absolutely loved. Okay.
Yeah,
And
fantastic.
why don't you and I will talk offline about because
Oh,
brother, I didn't want to be a published author either. Okay.
yeah,
I
yeah,
flunked sixth grade spelling and I can't type.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
I
yeah.
can't type. I dictated the whole book in Google Documents,
Fantastic. I
and
hats off to anybody who's a published author. It's it is a lot of work.
it is a lot of work, but I was coming off of one of those just demoralizing experiences of my life
Yeah,
when we lost a
yeah.
son to cancer.
Wow.
And I had to channel my
Yeah,
I had to channel my brain somewhere else.
yeah,
And the book did it. The book helped tremendously.
yeah,
Okay. Because I was in an incredible state of depression
yeah,
when Jeffrey died. Okay.
yeah.
And so my journey was a little bit different. Okay. And as a matter of fact, I'm getting ready to actually do classes, a master class on here's an unconventional way of becoming a book writer with one of
Fantastic.
my nephews, actually. Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
Um, and we actually have a group we call the Military Writers Club that we're developing.
Oh,
I'm going to
wow.
talk more
Awesome.
about,
Yeah,
but let's talk about it because this story does need to get out. And this is the kind of story that every publisher is looking for.
yeah,
Okay. A kid grown up in a communist country, atheist, comes to the United States, is now flying A-10 Warthogs
yeah,
for the United States, and a convert to Christianity. Okay.
yeah.
Great
Yeah.
story. All right.
Well, thanks.
So great story.
Thanks, God.
Hey, brother, we've been at this for quite a while.
I know.
I'm sorry it took us so long to get the internet going. Like I
Okay.
said, I've got the thing right here beside me now.
Yeah.
But dude, this was freaking awesome. We hadn't even talked about flying with Southwest.
No, that's great too. So,
Yeah, I know. Hey, you know what a lot of my
yeah.
listeners have asked?
What's that?
This Boeing rudder issue that they've had with this piece of equipment they put in it. Can you just speak to that just real quick? What that was and God, I can't remember the name of it. But there was two very sad incidences with it, obviously. One Lion Air and another one. Because a lot of people have asked about what that system is and why is it even in the airplane?
Yeah, I'm really not qualified other than just as a line pilot to talk to it. I'll just say big picture. I think it was one of these things that they were rushing it to production in a way that it was meant to prevent the MCAS system meant to prevent F6 stall kind of thing, and it would force it over in a way that it was not intuitive to pilots to
Uh,
counteract if they hadn't been fully trained on what that system was
yeah,
doing, confused as to what it's telling them, and got in a really horrible situation.
yeah,
Thankfully, it's fixed. It's perfectly safe airplane. In fact,
yeah,
I love flying the Max.
yeah. They're all flying now.
Yeah,
I know.
and it's just a real shame that anything bad like that happened.
Yeah. And you and I have flown Boeing equipment for a long time.
Yeah,
Okay. And Boeing is obviously getting a lot of bad press right now. Okay.
yep.
And the former CEO of Rockwell Collins is now the CEO of Boeing, Kelly Ortberg, and he's
Okay.
got
Yeah,
he's got he's got his work cut out for him. Okay.
sure.
But you and I have flown Boeing equipment half our adult lives.
Yeah, that's right.
And I've got to tell you, some of the
They're great.
finest airplanes that have ever been made.
That's
Ever
absolutely
been
right.
made.
And I trust my life to them every day.
Yeah.
Every day I go to work, and they're great. And every version of it has been solid as a rock. I've flown it in every kind of horrible weather you can
Yeah.
imagine, and I'm happily will continue to put my family on them. So
Yeah.
I think everybody else should
Oh
too.
yeah. And you know what? I mean, I was flying airplanes that were made before I came off the assembly line,
Right.
in the
Yeah.
KC-135. Okay. We had
Yeah.
55 models, 56 models. I came off the assembly line in 57.
Right.
Okay. And I was even flying 57 models. Matter of fact, when I was at Fairchild, we had three tails that were 57 models that two came off in February, one came off in March, I came off in May, and
Yeah. I
I'm
remember
telling
it
you.
was a major career goal of mine to fly something younger than me at one point. So, yeah. So finally did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what? We used to always say, if it's Boeing, we're going. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have no doubt, and there's no doubt in my mind, these are also really smart people and they'll figure it out. They'll
That's
figure it
right.
out. But I'm just sorry that they've gotten some bad press because of this and, the KC-46 and, but I'm telling you, I'd get on a KC-135 any
Yeah.
freaking day of the week. And that airplane's almost 60 years old.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Isn't
It's
it though? Isn't
incredible.
it though? Hey,
Yeah.
brother, it's been great to have you on, man.
You too. Thank you, Sluggo. It's a great honor for me, and I really appreciate you having me.
This has been a wonderful, man. We've been almost 3 hours, you know, and but the story of Joseph needs to be told.
It does.
Joseph Jonas, that's a great story, and so many others that you've given us. So
Yeah.
brother Cliff, thanks for being on the Lessons from the Cockpit show,
Thank you.
folks. I hope you enjoyed that story of Jonas becoming an American citizen, going into the Army, then becoming an A-10 pilot. And of course, Cliff's story is incredible as well. And I like the fact that he was vulnerable with us and talked about some of his failures, but more importantly, folks, how he overcame them. There's a great quote by Tom Brady where he talks about, yeah, the wins were great. Let's talk about the losses, because the losses are the things that make you grow. And today we heard about a lot of growth from a guy who's flown airplanes for the Air Force and a guy who was once a communist enemy who's now flying for the United States Air Force in the Hogs. Great story. This episode, the 109th episode, is brought to you by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home office or hangar. Beautiful 4, 6, and 8 foot prints that you can peel off, stick on your wall like 8874, the tanker above me. 158 ready to print right now. Or let us do a custom one for you. Is there an airplane that you love, that you want on your wall, or that your kids love? From a particular unit, with a particular weapons load, pick a particular type of airplane, or from a particular kind of war. World War II, all the way up to fifth gen fighters. We've got them. We're working on helicopters still. They're kind of tough. But folks, we have available almost 800 profiles. Some of them we got to fill in a little bit, but go to wallpilot.com and take a look at the ready to print or fill out one of the custom forms and let us do one for you. Let us do your airplane. We'd love to do it. Those of you out there, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and become a member of the All Ranks Club. That's my Patreon page, my Patreon group. Those of you that join at the designated driver and the by the bar will get some wonderful stickers that we've made up for those people joining. One-on-one time with me, question and answer periods. Also, get into some of the YouTube things that I do that is only available to my All Ranks Club members. Go to the link below in the show notes and become a member of the Patreon of my Patreon channel, All Ranks Club. Or folks, if you just want to contribute to the show, my Venmo link is down there also. And just contribute some money to us to keep us going. We really appreciate all of you that tune in to this show. And I hope you enjoyed this one, because this one is a great one for Memorial Weekend. And a great story about one of our former enemies now flying for our United States Air Force in the Hawg. And of course, he picked the Hawg because he spent some time in the Army. Joseph Jonas has a very, very fascinating journey. And I hope you enjoyed this episode and to hear about this. Don't know when Cliff's book is going to be out. I will update you on that when it is available. So, folks, thank you once again for joining me on the Lessons from the Cockpit show. And please go join my All Ranks Club and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm Sluggo, Mark Hasara, signing out here. Thanks.